It all started when an ugly servant and the young daughter of a noble family secretly fell in love. Even though they were just kids, they enjoyed every single moment they could spend together. But their happiness didn't last long. The girl's family soon found out about their forbidden love, and threw the servant out of the palace where he worked. They left the poor boy abandoned in a freezing forest during deadly cold weather. With no money to buy even a bite of food to survive and no weapon to defend himself, the boy was completely helpless. That day was the last time the girl was able to see him. In those final moments, just before they were forced apart, the boy made a promise to her. He vowed that one day he would return, but strong and wealthy enough to be worthy of her, and when that time comes, he will ask for her hand in marriage. It was the only thing that could calm the girl's tears, giving her hope to see him again. But things didn't go as they had hoped. 15 years passed. The boy survived that horrible day, but instead of becoming someone honorable and worthy, he became the most feared and hated villain in the entire continent. The rumors about him were so terrifying that people began calling him the Demon Sword of Chaos. Just hearing his name was enough to make people shake in fear, or worse. Seeing him in person, that was something no one wanted to experience. On the other hand, the girl became someone completely different. She grew up to be a symbol of justice and hope, known as the Star of Righteousness and the Lunar Sword. She wasn't just one of the most skilled warriors in the kingdom. Her breathtaking beauty was on a different level than others. Her looks were so captivating that anyone who saw her face and body fell in love at first sight. Strangely enough, even after 15 years, she stayed loyal to that boy from her childhood, without even knowing he's alive or not. She hadn't forgotten his promise, and that's why she refused to let any man get close to her. This was just the start of the story, but things really got interesting when the scene shifted to the present day in a bustling inn. The place was packed, with people happily chatting about their achievements and adventures. In one corner, a young man sat quietly, observing the lively crowd and wondering if this little inn was truly the famous hub for merchants and travelers he'd heard about. The young man, Ju-yun, was a warrior with a spear he kept carefully wrapped. He was feeling pretty good, relieved to have made it to this place safely, and even happier because the locals treated him so kindly. Out of either genuine kindness, or perhaps because they thought he was some skilled fighter, a group of adventurers invited Ju-yun to join their guild and work with them. But Ju-yun politely declined. He explained that he wasn't here for working, but a personal mission. More like a dream to chase, and a promise he absolutely had to keep. That was his priority, and nothing would stop him. Actually, no one wanted to stop him. However, a bald man in the group gave him a serious warning. He told Ju-yun to be really careful while moving around the area. Naturally, Ju-yun was curious and asked what he meant by that. With a creepy look on his face, the man explained there was a dangerous monster lurking near the village, a cruel, bloodthirsty person who hunted martial artists and carried their severed heads around to terrify others. Ju-yun looked like he was impressed by the horror story, but the truth was, he wasn't unfamiliar with it at all. Sipping his tea calmly, he acted as if this was exactly why he was there. In the middle of their conversation, someone, walked into the inn, instantly grabbing everyone's attention. And sure enough, it was the very man they had just been talking about, the monstrous, wild-looking figure with his infamous bloody bag. He dropped the bag onto the floor with a heavy thud and began walking forward. His presence alone was enough to send chills through the room, freezing everyone in their seats. Everyone except Ju-yun, that either didn't know him or didn't care who's he. The others were terrified, only dared to whisper amongst themselves, wondering if this was really that monster the rumor said. With an irritated look, the man barked at the attendant to call the innkeeper immediately. But the attendant nervously explained that the innkeeper was out running an errand and offered to help with whatever the man needed in the meantime. Trying to be polite, the attendant reached for what he assumed was the man's luggage, intending to carry it to a quiet room until the innkeeper returned. As soon as the attendant looked at the bag, he froze, realizing it wasn't at all what he had expected. Still, he decided to carry it. But before he could do anything, the man grabbed his hand, stopping him in his tracks. The room fell silent. Everyone watched in terror, thinking this might be the end for the poor attendant. With another chilling side glare, the monstrous man declared loudly that the bag contained his prey, and no one but him had the right to touch it. The attendant freaked out, trembling uncontrollably, and the only thing he could do was stammer out an apology for disrespecting him. This unsettling scene sparked murmurs among the crowd, with people whispering that this man was every bit as cruel as the rumors claimed. But before he could do anything, the bag suddenly started to move, and the noise immediately caught the man's attention. He turned toward it, his expression dark and menacing. With a voice that sent shivers down everyone's spine, he muttered an apology to his prey, saying he was sorry for letting it suffer and that he would now finish what he had started. Just as his hand reached for the bag, someone sprang into action, stopping him in his tracks. That someone was none other than Ju-yun. He didn't just dare to stop the monstrous man. He He stood tall and fearlessly challenged him to an honorable duel. The room went silent in utter disbelief. No one, not even the bald man from earlier, had expected this. Everyone was questioning whether Ju-yun had lost his mind or had suddenly gone crazy. The monstrous man with the new wound on his face turned to Ju-yun, his lips curling into a mocking grin. His tone dripped with disdain as he sneered, "You? Against me?" Ju-yun, still brimming with confidence, boldly declared that he was here to confront the greatest enemy of the martial world, the one responsible for the suffering of every single person in the area. And of course, he was talking about this guy and not anyone else. He added that this was the dream and the oath that had driven him to come all this way. Hearing what sounded like a childish speech, the ugly, wild-looking man smirked before bursting into laughter, loud enough to echo for miles. Then, with a grin, he said something that caught Ju-yun's attention. The man asked why Ju-yun believed he was the so-called greatest enemy of the martial world. But before Ju-yun could even respond, the man waved it off, as if he already knew the answer. Letting out a heavy sigh, the man began to explain that not only Ju-yun, but everyone else, had misunderstood everything about him. However, before he could even finish his sentence, Ju-yun cut him off, mocking him outright. It was clear Ju-yun believed the man was just trying to make excuses to avoid a fight. With a loud clang, Ju-yun slammed his spear into the ground, once again declaring that he had come all this way for one reason alone, to find and fight him. He made it clear that no excuses would be accepted. Seeing how determined Ju-yun was, the monstrous man gave him a side glance, his expression unreadable, and said, "If that's the case, I accept your challenge, but I need to prepare first." Ju-yun froze for a moment, shocked to hear this. Then, narrowing his eyes, he shouted, "Don't tell me you're planning to run away." Before Ju-yun could get an answer from his opponent, the crowd around him started yelling at him, asking if he'd gone completely mad. They all made it clear that the infamous monster standing before him was not the kind of guy who'd ever back out of a fight. There was no way someone like him would run away just to avoid facing Ju-yun. In everyone's eyes, this evil and ruthless man, who didn't care if his opponent was rogue or righteous and would do anything to win, had no reason to avoid fighting a kid like Ju-yun. The crowd tried to stop the stupid-looking boy, voicing their concerns and practically begging him to reconsider, as they were convinced Ju-yun was walking straight into a death trap, knowing fighting with this guy was as good as suicide. But Ju-yun wouldn't back down. He'd sworn an oath, and no amount of warnings or fear could shake his resolve. He wanted to become the greatest in the world, and to do that, he had to take down the most hated and feared person around to achieve that. Soon later, Ju-yun agreed to give the man a short time to prepare for the battle, and the monster disappeared into a room to get ready. At first, it seemed like he'd gone to prepare or make some plans before the fight, but that wasn't the case at all. As you well know, this monstrous, cruel-looking man was our protagonist, the servant boy who survived until now. Strangely enough, he wasn't preparing for the fight at all, but actually, he wanted to buy some time, desperately trying to figure out a way to run away without dueling. Our boy's name was Hyeol, and he was only here to sell his prey, not to cause trouble or anything. And that prey he brought here happened to be a small boar he had barely managed to hunt earlier, not some martial artist's head or anything impressive like the rumors made him out to be. He was wondering why he never gets a single chance to clarify this misunderstanding about being labeled as not just an ordinary villain, but the martial world's biggest enemy. Hyeol knew he couldn't even use his inner power, worst thing for a fighter that could happen in that era. Knowing better than anyone that he's as weak as a third-rate warrior, basically the equivalent of someone with an E-rank potential, the poor guy couldn't help but to think, why would people keep judging him only by his appearance? Panicked by the misunderstanding he was caught in, Hyeol desperately tried to figure out a way to avoid dying in a duel with that persistent guy. The way Ju-yun charged at him like a madman, all because Hyeol out of kindness had stopped the inn attendant from touching his dirty bag, made him realize just how dire his situation was. Hyeol really didn't want to die so easily, especially not in a duel with some good-looking guy. The boy also had dreams and promises to keep, something that didn't let him die before they were fulfilled. Speaking of her, fate had a strange sense of timing, because at that very moment, the girl Hyeol was thinking about accidentally entered the same village he was in. The commotion and fuss Ju-yun was causing by shouting for the demon sword of chaos to come out soon caught her attention. Since she'd also heard all the rumors about the so-called demon sword of chaos, she decided to approach Tassin and see what's going on. As soon as she arrived, she gently tapped on the neck of Ju-yun. As the boy turned to see who had touched him, his eyes widened in shock and disbelief. That was the moment she took off her hat, revealing her face, and asked if he was the one planning to fight the demon sword of chaos. Her striking red eyes, which perfectly matched her pink and silver hair, and of course the huge size of her chest, made Ju-yoon's heart skip a beat, making him blushes, just like everyone else around them. Before he could say anything, another man's voice from behind him broke the moment. That man seemed to recognize her and exclaimed that she was the Lunar Sword, the direct disciple of the former greatest martial artist, Seolhwa. Ju-yoon couldn't help but think that she, just like him, had come to take down the biggest enemy of the martial world, the Demon Sword of Chaos. Determined not to miss this chance to make a name for himself alongside her, he boldly declared that he wanted to team up with her, stating it would be an honor if she agreed to help him kill Hyeol, the famous Demon Sword of Chaos. Seolhwa finally realized what was really happening, and couldn't be any happier. Of course, she didn't care about the duel or Ju-yoon, but the fact that she'd finally found her lover location after 15 long years. She couldn't wait another second to see him, but her reaction completely confused Ju-yoon. He thought she was impressed by his bravery and intentions of challenging the demon sword, which made him feel like he's been chosen for making a baby with her. As Seolhwa started to slowly walk forward, Ju-yoon began daydreaming and thinking big. He suggested again that they team up to fight Hyeol, and after that, they could form a strong partnership and travel the world together. Meanwhile, inside the inn, everything seemed to be a little chaotic for Hyeol. He was still desperately trying to figure out a way to avoid the duel, completely unaware of the chaos brewing outside. He couldn't stop thinking that the best solution was to report the situation to the authorities, as dueling was strictly forbidden by law. Just as he resolved to report as his responsibility thing as a normal citizen, the inn's wooden wall suddenly burst apart, slashed several times by a sword before someone made a dramatic entrance. The poor boy jumped into a corner, trembling as he tried to take cover, and of course it was Ju-yoon. Seeing him made Hyeol scream in absolute fear, convinced his life was over before he'd even had the chance to marry Seolhwa. Crawling backward, Hyeol frantically started making excuses, saying he wasn't ready yet, and that Ju-yoon should wait a little longer, and even it's a private room that he shouldn't enter without permission. His panicked rambling was suddenly interrupted by Seolhwa, who entered the room and said, "Finally, I've found you." Hyeol was left completely speechless, either from seeing the love of his life or from realizing that girl was the one who made that dramatic entrance without even recognizing her. In a second, everything became clear that it wasn't Ju-yoon but the girl, who was using the poor boy's unconscious body to shatter the wall and the inn's door, only to prove what happens when someone disrespects Lunar Sword's precious and long-lost lover. As she tossed Ju-yoon's battered and unconscious body to the ground, Seolhwa turned her attention to Hyeol and began walking toward him. She proudly declared that she had become one of the strongest martial artists on the continent and now had more than enough money to start the best life for both of them. And of course, the money she mentioned was something she had earned herself, not inherited from her family. She stepped closer, looking at the boy she loved, the one everyone else called the Devil Sword of Chaos. But neither the hated title nor his current pitiful situation could change her feelings for him. Without hesitation, Seolhwa looked him in the eyes and asked him to marry her, boldly stating that there was anything or anyone who could stop their marriage now. Unlike what people outside imagined would happen, like the explosive clash of two supernovas, the greatest hero Lunar Sword and the most feared villain Devil Sword, everything was surprisingly calm inside the boy's resting room. The boy, being a little clueless, didn't actually recognize Seol. Even after being reminded of the promise, he just stared at her quietly, then suddenly pointed to a door behind him and said, "You're looking for the Demon Sword of Chaos, right?" He just left the room. But Yu himself realized, with his face plastered on wanted posters everywhere, that this lame trick wasn't going to work. Since he didn't get any answers from her, he figured it was best to take this chance and make a run for it. He awkwardly started walking toward the exit, mumbling apologies and saying he had some urgent business to attend to, but things didn't go as planned. Seal grabbed his hand gently, stopping him, making him to think it might be an end for him. To use shock, instead of hurting him, she did something completely unexpected. She pulled off his glove and placed his hand gently on her cheek. The gesture reminded her of the way he used to show his affection. Feeling Yu's hand, even though she was the one guiding it, made her blush, just like she used to in the past. Just then, she softly asked him to call her name again. Finally, the clueless and forgetful man started to realize who she was, saying, "Are you Lady Seol?" Suddenly, the happy memories of their secret love came rushing back to him. As someone who was sold into Seol's wealthy family as a slave during a famine, he never expected to be treated with kindness, let alone loved by the family's youngest daughter like this. He suddenly realized just how much he missed those days. That was the last thing he remembered before snapping back to reality, finding himself sitting near the same girl he used to secretly love, but now in a private room. As he glanced at her quietly, he realized that Seol hadn't just grown up into a well-grown woman. She had become even more beautiful than before, more than anyone he had ever known. But even knowing who she was now, Yu felt uneasy sitting so close to her. The silence was broken when Seol suddenly asked why Yu wasn't drinking his tea. Startled, the boy awkwardly thanked her and said he'd drink it right away. Trying to be more polite, he added, "My lady," at the end of his sentence. Immediately, Seol's expression darkened. She reminded him again about the promise they'd made, that he wouldn't call her lady. Not wanting to upset her, Yu hesitated and this time called her Lady Seol. But it still wasn't enough for her. She didn't like how distant and formal it sounded, as if he were talking to a stranger. The boy decided to give it a shot and take a step forward. Blushing and too embarrassed to look her in the eyes, he softly said Seol's name and told her he was happy to see her again. That simple sentence was enough to light up her face, turning her into the cheerful girl he remembered. She responded with a smile, saying she was even happier to see him again. Her beautiful face and the way she reacted made it almost impossible for the boy to control his wandering thoughts. To distract himself and calm his wild imagination, Yu quickly pointed to Seol's sword and asked if she had really become a martial artist. Despite having said it many times before, she proudly repeated that she had worked incredibly hard and had become one of the greatest martial artists. And, she added, all that hard work was for the sake of who she loved. Yu didn't visibly act like he had remembered their promise, but the image of him from the last time they met, shouting that he'd become strong and wealthy enough to be worthy of marrying her someday, was something Seol could never forget. It took some time before Yu's jaw dropped in shock as he finally realized what she was talking about. On the other hand, Seol assumed he, just like her, had never forgotten that promise, and his overreaction was because of seeing she remembered it too. The girl then explained how she managed to find him after hearing the rumors about the Demon Sword of Chaos. Hearing his famous title made the boy flinch, knowing she probably had plans to question and tease him about it. But Seol didn't bring it up directly. Instead, she started talking about the rumors surrounding the Demon Sword of Chaos, things like harassing MILF women and skipping out on paying for meals. The way those stories perfectly matched Yu's behavior back when he was a slave made her realize that the feared person everyone talked about was the same boy she had once loved. Seol grabbed Yu's dirty hand and firmly declared that she didn't care about what the world thought of him. It didn't matter to her if he was cruel, hated, or even a bit of a pervert. She loved him just the way he was. There was only one thing she wanted, to marry him, and nothing else. Unlike Seol, who seemed eager to marry him and start a family as soon as possible, Yu clearly wasn't on the same page. Not only did he show no interest in getting married, but he was also coming up with excuses to avoid it altogether. He quickly found one, telling her there was something big standing in the way of their marriage, an enormous amount of debt tying him down. And, for once, he wasn't fully lying. In past, Hyeol had tried countless times to learn martial arts and become stronger, but every master he went to would eventually kick him out after seeing his pathetic and weak potential, refusing to train him, while keeping his hard-earned money. One of those days when he hit rock bottom, broke, desperate, and hopeless, someone appeared out of nowhere and offered him money. But in return, Hyeol had to agree to do something for that person. That actually was part of the truth, not all of it, but now the scene shifted to the Eternal Bureau Guild, where a woman, dressed without even wearing lingerie, introduced herself as one of the guild's leaders, by the name of Hang Kyung. It turned out she was that person saved Yu by offering money instead of doing what she wanted. And of course, it was Seol who had come all the way here after hearing about it to solve the one problem that was holding Hyeol back from marrying her. Seol didn't hold back and immediately questioned the way this woman tricked men like Hyeol by paying off their debts and then using them as if she owned them. Of course, Seol came to this conclusion based only on her perspective and Yu's explanation. But Han Kyung herself looked genuinely confused, not understanding why this girl was accusing her of such things. The truth was, Han Kyung was more like a sugar mommy to Hyeol. She had been financially supporting him in every way he needed, only in return of using his feared title, and now Yu was starting to regret dragging his only supporter into this awkward mess. Unlike everyone else who hated him for no reason, Hang had not only paid off his debt but also covered his living costs, without asking for much in return. As for Hyeol, the real reason he was using this debt excuse to avoid marrying Seol was because of how he thought she saw him. He believed Seol had mistaken him, thinking Yu had become the worthy man as he promised, a warrior or someone who was on her level. The thought of getting into serious trouble later when they were married, being beaten and interrogated after revealing the truth, and not being able to do a thing about it, made the boy freak out and find this way to avoid it. In a panic, he recklessly decided to drag Han Kyung right into the middle of his mess, as she was the only one who Ye could rely on. That was when the woman glanced at Hyeol's stupid-looking face, which kind of secretly pleading with her to play along. Being as sharp as ever, Hang quickly picked up on the situation, figuring that Hyeol brought Seol here hoping to use her help and knowledge to get rid of this problem. Just then, Seol demanded to know the total amount of money Hyeol owed. Hang hesitated for a moment before saying it was complicated. She wanted to throw out some ridiculously high number for the boy's debt, something so crazy that Seol wouldn't even consider paying it off. Hang, finally, came to a decision and confidently announced that if Seol wanted to clear his entire debt, she'd need to pay 10,000 gold coins. That was exactly what Hyeol had expected her to say. The dumb boy got happy. He knew there was no chance Seol could come up with such an outrageous amount, especially for someone like him. And even if she tried, it would take her forever to gather it all and bring it here. Hoping to buy himself more time, and maybe even find a way to escape, he suggested they head back and think it over some more. But to everyone's shock, Seol suddenly pulled out a big bag, completely out of nowhere, or maybe out of her ass. A bag stuffed full of gold coins, more than enough to pay off Hyeol's debt. Both Hyeol and Hong were stunned, their eyes wide as they wondered where on earth the girl had gotten that massive bag so suddenly. Hyeol's entire plan had completely fallen apart, and his disappointed expression didn't go unnoticed by Seol. However, she assumed he was feeling ashamed because she was paying off someone like him's debt. Instead of being upset or disappointed by his reaction, Seol tried to comfort him. She gently reassured him, saying that since they were going to get married soon, there wouldn't be his money or her money anymore, as everything would belong to both of them. To make the matter worse, she added that nothing was ever wasteful when it came to Hyeol. Her words hit hard the boy like an arrow right into his unworthy of love heart. They cut deep, forcing him to rethink his entire decision. Hang Kyung, on the other hand, was still stunned as she stared at the pile of gold coins, thinking it really was way more than she had asked for. But as she glanced at Hyeol, she realized he's being dragged to an unwanted marriage. There, she thought she needed to take things a step further if she wanted to make Seol feel disappointed or back off. With a sly idea forming in her mind, Hang slowly got to her feet, a mischievous glint in her eyes, and suddenly shouted, "Hold on!" Seol and Hyeol were just about to leave, but Seol turned back at the sound of Hang's voice, half expecting her to demand more money. However, this wasn't about money at all. Hang stepped toward Hyeol and, without warning, wrapped her arms tightly around him in a hug. It was as if she was either pretending or maybe even revealing the truth about their actual relationship and the real reason she had been paying for his living expenses. Even Hyeol himself was caught completely off guard, shocked at the bold move Hang had just pulled. Seol's eyes widened in shock and, of course, disbelief, just from watching this scene. Ignoring her for a moment and with a meaningful glance, Hang leaned in and whispered to Hyeol, "Don't panic. I'll handle this girl for you." But things didn't play out the way she had expected. Seol wasn't about to let this matter to slide so easily. Her response was immediate and intense. First, her glowing sword appeared in her hand, and then her entire body became cloaked in wild, crackling lightning. She glared at Hang Kyung, her voice sharp and commanding as she demanded, "Step away from Hyeol right now, or I'll make you do it by force." In that very moment, both Hang and Hyeol realized they were in deep trouble. They had only two options: either step away from each other peacefully or face the terrifying consequences of Seol's wrath. As soon as Seolhwa started walking forward, Hong began regretting her decision, thinking she might have gone too far this time. On the other hand, Hyeol was desperately begging Seol to calm down, explaining it was all just a misunderstanding and not what she thought. Seol, however, ignored both of them, still moving closer and demanding they should stay away from each other right now. Her eyes made it clear that she wasn't joking and might actually kill them both. In a panic, trying to convince her and save their lives, Yu blurted out, "Stay calm, Seolhwa. You're someone really important to me." That one sentence worked like magic, like pouring water on a fire. It made the furious girl pause and slowly calm down to her usual self. Seeing this, Yu felt a wave of relief, knowing they were safe now. However, even though Seol wasn't angry anymore, she was heartbroken, sad to think the person she loved had betrayed her with a sugar mommy. Yu wanted to apologize and explain there was no real love between him and that woman, but Seol didn't want to hear any of his excuses. Without a word, she turned and started walking toward the door. Yu ran after her, trying to stop her and explain everything, but she ignored him and kept going. Hyeol didn't want to hurt her feelings, but Hang seemed pretty pleased with how things turned out. In her opinion, everything worked out perfectly. Yu turned to her in shock. He didn't question or blame Hang about her wild actions. Instead, he let his expression do the talking. Showing upsetting and hurting Seol wasn't his intention at all. Hang returned to her seat and started sharing her experiences as a guild leader and merchant with him. To her, this wasn't exactly the most peaceful solution, but it was definitely the most effective way to stop the unwanted marriage, the only reason Yu had come here in the first place. Hyeol was surprised, almost stunned, to be reminded of that fact, but instead of feeling happy about achieving his goal, he was filled with guilt. A few minutes later on the other side of village, something caught the attention of the villagers in nearby. It was, of course, the demon sword of chaos. Yu's dark presence and aura surrounding him were something impossible to ignore for them. However, it was all just in their imagination. Yu was simply walking along, consumed by regret for hurting Seolhwa's feelings and making it look like he had cheated on her. These overwhelming feelings of sadness brought back memories of the past when he was just a lowly servant. Back then, Seolhwa had treated him with more than enough kindness, seeing him as an ordinary boy but worthy of her love. Hyeol couldn't help but wonder why, even after all his efforts to close the gap between them and stand proudly by her side, nothing ever seemed to change. Her kindness and his love always felt just out of reach. The boy made up his mind. He had to find Seol as quickly as possible and explain the truth to her, everything she needed to know. Just then, he overheard a conversation that caught his attention. Not far away, a man was telling his wife that he had just seen a woman with white hair, dressed entirely in white, running through the mountains as if she'd seen a ghost, heading straight toward the edge of a cliff. Hearing this, Hyeol instantly realized it had to be Seol. His heart sank as he thought she was going to end her life because of his reckless behavior. A moment later, the woman suddenly started trembling in fear, which made her husband wonder if she was scared something terrible might happen to the mysterious woman that he was talking about. But her horror wasn't from his story. It was because of the sight of the demon sword of chaos. Yu slowly revealed his presence by asking her husband exactly where he had seen the woman. Minutes later, Hyeol was at the location the man had described, panting and completely out of breath. He wasn't sure if he was in the right place, so he decided to look around, hoping to find some sign of her. In first second, his eyes landed on Seolhwa. She was standing at the edge of the cliff, ready to end her life, and it was all because of him. Without hesitation, and faster than a bolt of lightning, the boy dashed forward and hugged her from behind, saying he'd marry her right now if she reconsidered about suiciding. But to his shock, it wasn't the girl, but it was a 200-year-old grandpa, who froze in surprise. His surprise quickly turned to embarrassment, and his face turned bright red at the thought of a young man wanting to marry him and do whatever he wanted. It was only then that Hyeol realized the ridiculous situation he had just thrown himself into by charging ahead recklessly without checking if it was really Seolhwa. Feeling horribly awkward, he quickly let go, turned away, and started apologizing profusely, explaining that he had mistaken the old man for someone else. But to his surprise, the grandpa wasn't about to let him off the hook so easily. As Yu tried to leave, the old man shouted after him, demanding, "Are you really just going to walk away like that? So irresponsibly?" Hyeol's eyes widened in shock, realizing the grandpa wasn't talking about himself at all. Instead, he was offering advice about Yu's relationship with Seolhwa, speaking like someone who somehow knew everything that had happened between them, from the past to the present. The old man shouted again, "Do you even know what was reflected in that child's eyes when you hurt her?" He continued, his voice booming with authority. "Anger, disappointment, sadness, whatever it was, don't you dare underestimate the feelings of someone like her." Finally, the boy got what the old man was saying, thinking he must be a messenger from God who came to show him the right way. He turned to thank the old man and ask for some wise advice about his situation. But that's when Hyeol realized the old man wasn't even talking to him, but more like a crazy man was talking to the tree behind him. Just then, the man's grandchild came rushing over, scolding his grandfather and asking why he'd come here again without telling him. Yu's jaw dropped. He was completely speechless because in that moment nothing made sense to him. The old man's speech felt like it was directed at him, but it turned out wasn't at all. By the time Hyeol finally made his way back down the mountain, the sun was setting, and he felt like he'd completely wasted his time. Even so, the old man's words about not underestimating Seol's feelings kept running through his mind, making him feel even worse. When he finally arrived home, his head was hung low, still wondering what he should do next. He was so lost in thought that he didn't even notice Seol standing right there in front of him. He only snapped out of it when she greeted him and welcomed him home, leaving him stunned for a moment. He shouted in disbelief, asking when and how she had gotten in here. Seol casually explained that she'd been here the whole time after leaving him earlier. The girl declared she'd actually found his house before they even ran into each other during the incident that morning. Hyeol froze for a moment, caught between relief and guilt. He was happy to see Seol safe and sound, but it didn't take long for him to notice her face. She'd clearly been crying a lot today. Seolhwa was surprised that Hyeol noticed she had been crying, but she tried to deny it. Still, it wasn't something she could hide, and the boy became more persistent, knowing it was because of what happened today and how he had hurt her feelings. He decided to explain everything about him and Han Kyung, making it clear it was all a misunderstanding. However, Seol had already figured out the truth. She knew there wasn't any love or anything that made it look like cheating, but the fact that he went this far just to avoid marrying her, that was what truly hurt her and made her sad and of course angry. Hyeol froze when he heard this, realizing she already knew everything, but then the old man's words echoed in his mind, urging him to be honest for once. Instead of denying it or lying to convince her otherwise, he admitted the truth. He confessed that he really couldn't marry her. As soon as Seol heard those words, tears filled her eyes uncontrollably. She apologized to him with a look of disappointment, avoiding his gaze as she told him she wouldn't bother him anymore and would leave immediately. But Hyeol wasn't going to let her go. He placed his hands on her shoulders, stopping her in her tracks. Seolhwa's disappointed expression quickly turned to one of shock when Yu blurted out, "No, that's not it, Seolhwa." She had been expecting something sweet and reasonable to explain why they couldn't get married. Instead, to her surprise, Hyeol started shouting, admitting that his average income was only 200 yen per month, stating that amount of money even wasn't enough for filling his own stomach. It seems that was the real reason he couldn't afford to marry her right now. Seolhwa blinked in confusion, not at all expecting this. Hyeol, unable to hold back anymore, pointed to the shabby house and confessed that he could only rent it through an acquaintance, thanks to Han Kyung's help, and without her help he would have been sleeping naked on streets. He didn't sugarcoat anything, clarifying that the rumors about him were just exaggerated stories built on misunderstandings. He wasn't some skilled or amazing warrior worthy of being called the demon sword of chaos. He hadn't even fulfilled the promise he made himself. Despite everything, Hyeol didn't want to lose Seolhwa, not even after breaking her trust. He looked her in the eye and asked if she'd give him another chance, like in the past, back when she loved him unconditionally. He vowed to do whatever it took to become stronger and wealthier, to be the man she deserved, just as he had promised. Then, without thinking, Yu suddenly hugged Seol tightly, pressing her into his arms, only to show how serious he was about their future. Seolhwa froze in surprise as she didn't expect it to happen. She knew well it's been more than 15 years since they hugged each other like this. Hyeol was having the hardest time, his face red and completely embarrassed. Still, if he wanted to propose officially and eventually be with the girl he loved, he knew he had to take the first step now. Surprisingly, it worked. The girl agreed to wait as long as it took for him to become rich and strong enough and only then marry each other. Everything seemed settled, but neither of them was ready to let go of the other just yet. Then, Yu did something interesting, something any pervert guy might do in that situation. He lowered his hand from around Seol's neck and, with a sneaky move, touched the girl's lower body without saying any word. Almost immediately, he realized it wasn't the smartest move. After all, they weren't even a couple yet. He wanted to do something bold, but he quickly decided it'd be better to wait until they were officially husband and wife. But Seolhwa wasn't letting go either. She held onto him tightly, her grip firm, almost possessive. Suddenly she pushed Hyeol backward, making him stumble as his foot caught on something. His back hit the wall, and before he could react, Seolhwa leaned in uncomfortably close. So close that Hyeol, already blushing furiously, felt like he was going to lose control. Acting all innocent, he tried to stop Seolhwa before things went too far, but Seolhwa wasn't planning to back off until she got what she wanted. She crawled closer, upright enough to be face-to-face with the flustered boy, and whispered slowly, "Let's have the wedding ceremony in front of our future kids." And with that, they started messing around with each other. Just as anyone would expect, their playful screams filled the air. Meanwhile, someone passing by in the alley overheard their voices. Of course, he had no idea what they were actually doing. Instead, he assumed the lunar sword had finally tracked down the demon sword of chaos, and now the two were locked in an intense battle. Faster than lightning, rumors began to spread. With each retelling, the story got twisted, exaggerated, and sprinkled with everyone's own perspectives and judgments. Before long, not just the village, but the entire world was buzzing with wild versions of the event. And, as usual, no one had any clue what actually happened. Eventually, the rumors turned to the demon sword killed the lunar sword and reached someone specific, a pink-haired girl who seemed visibly overjoyed by the news. Of course, she wasn't alone. She was guarded by another woman, who didn't hesitate to ask if she was planning to take action now. The pink-haired girl gave a confident nod and said, "Since one of the greatest stars in the world has fallen, it's my responsibility to step in and make sure the world knows my name and my guild's name." A few days later, on an early, peaceful morning, Seol woke up after spending a long and wonderful night with the so-called ugly guy. She was fixing her hair with a satisfied smile on her face. At the same time, she kept glancing at the door of the house where Yu was still sleeping. She couldn't have been happier, knowing she no longer had to search for her childhood love. Eager for him to wake up so they could practice some wrestling techniques again. Only thinking about it made her to feel excitement bubbling inside her. But her peaceful and dreamy moment was suddenly shattered when someone appeared out of nowhere, shouting angrily and calling you an ugly bastard rascal. Of course, this made Seol's mood change in an instant. The man didn't even notice her and kept yelling, "Let's end this today, demon sword of chaos." He was clearly not planning to leave until he gave Yu a proper beating. Despite knowing who Yu was, the infamous demon sword of chaos, the man seemed completely unafraid. In an instant, as he said, "I haven't forgotten what day it is," a sword appeared and pierced through the air, stopping him mid-sentence. Unsurprisingly, it was Lady Seol, who couldn't stand to see her boyfriend being insulted by this scruffy-looking man. Pressing the sword closer to him, she glared and demanded, "What's so important about today that you haven't forgotten?" Terrified and lost for words, the man froze. But before he could respond, Seol smirked and answered her own question by saying, "It's your death anniversary." Her words sent chills down his spine, but somehow he managed to muster the courage to stammer out a question. "Who even are you? I've never seen you before." Leaning in slowly, her voice low and laced with anger, Seol whispered, "I'm the mistress of this house." The man blinked in disbelief before nervously revealing the truth. He was the landlord of the house, the very house she had just claimed as being its mistress. That's when it hit Lady Seol. She had gone completely overboard again. But of course, this was just part of her personality, and there wasn't much she could do about it. The man, sensing an opportunity to defuse the situation, quickly clarified, "I'm just here to collect the rent. That's all I meant when I said I hadn't forgotten this day." Realizing her mistake, Seol stepped back, letting the awkward tension settle. With that, the uncomfortable situation came to an end, and the scene shifted to the house kitchen. There, Lady Seol, back to her usual self, was cooking up a storm like a pro chef, preparing food for the day ahead. The so-called demon sword of chaos finally woke up after all the commotion, completely clueless about why the landlord was even there. The landlord, however, wasn't about to let things slide. He was furious. Not only had Yu failed to pay rent for several months, but now his so-called wife had tried to kill him without even knowing who he was. And to make matters worse, this landlord was also the innkeeper whose inn Yu and Lady Seol had managed to turn into a ruined building. It all made sense why the man was shouting in anger. But Yu, ever the broke and resourceful man, decided to play the victim. He apologized profusely, insisting it wasn't his fault at all. The landlord, however, wasn't buying it, and made it clear that an apology wasn't going to cut it. His fury was palpable, until he noticed a shadowy figure watching him closely. Of course, it was none other than Lady Seol. She stood there, silently, with a sharp cleaver in her hand, her eyes locked on him like a predator sizing up its prey. The landlord quickly realized that for his own safety, it might be better to handle this situation more peacefully. A few tense moments later, they all moved outside, sitting across from each other to talk things through. Seizing the opportunity while Seol wasn't around, the landlord cautiously leaned toward Yu and whispered, "Who is that crazy woman? And what did she mean by calling herself the mistress of this house?" At first, Yu was taken aback by the sudden question, but he quickly composed himself and confidently explained that it was the same woman he had mentioned before, the lady he once served and promised his future to. The ugly landlord vaguely remembered hearing the story before, but he had never imagined it was real. He always thought Yu was just talking about some fantasy or dream of his. Even though the landlord knew of Seolhwa and her reputation as the Lunar Sword, he never had the chance to meet her in person, so when Yu mentioned her name, the man froze in shock. Part of his surprise came from the fact that he couldn't wrap his head around someone as beautiful as Seolhwa choosing to live with someone like this ugly loser. But what truly left him stunned was realizing he had heard some unsettling rumors about them. The irony was that Yu was the only one completely unaware of these stories about himself and Seolhwa. Apparently, after that magical night for Yu and Seol, several wild rumors had started to spread. And as an innkeeper who interacted with countless people, the landlord had heard most of them. Of course, he had dismissed them all as nonsense. Until now. Now, one particular rumor seemed to click. The story about how the demon sword of chaos had tricked and cowardly trapped the lunar sword by hypnotizing her, enslaving her, and forcing her to do whatever dirty, shameful things he wanted. Hearing this for the first time, Yu freaked out. He never imagined people would come up with such wild stories about him. But honestly, if anyone saw how Seol cared for this ugly guy, they probably wouldn't come up with a better explanation. Just then, Seol herself joined the conversation, bringing out the well-prepared food she'd made for them. Even in front of the landlord, she didn't hold back. With love and care, she started feeding her future husband, as if no one else was there. Yu, completely caught off guard, was impressed by her boldness, while the landlord sat there watching the scene unfold. This only made him feel even more conflicted. On one hand, it made the rumors seem more believable. On the other hand, it sparked a mix of jealousy, or maybe even disgust, at their public display of affection. Still, being a kind-hearted man, he decided not to interfere. Instead, he chose to warn them about how the whole world now saw them as two shining, opposite stars of martial arts, a pairing that had already attracted major attention. Unlike you, who always panicked at the slightest problem, Seol remained calm. Gently, she grabbed his hand and, with a loving, reassuring look, reminded him that he had nothing to worry about as long as they stood by each other's side. That one look of her was enough to give any man the confidence to face an entire army alone, and Yu was no exception. Yu raised his hand and clenched his fist, silently vowing to himself that he would become a master no matter what. He promised to buy a proper house for her, and when that day came, nothing in the world would tear them apart. Their eyes met afterward, and they looked like they were ready to start another round of baby-making. Luckily, the landlord was still there, watching them with a disgusted expression. He made a circle with his fingers and, in a mocking voice, like he could read the boy's mind, said he should probably focus on paying his rent and debts before getting carried away. To his surprise, Yu immediately came up with a brilliant plan for that. Hours passed, and the sun was slowly giving way to the moon. The landlord, who had been irritated earlier, now looked excited because Yu and Lady Seol had gone back to Yu's sugar mommy to borrow some money to clear his debts. To Yu's surprise, after he calmly explained how everything had been resolved with Seol, Hang didn't hesitate to return Seol's gold, something he never expected. They didn't keep the landlord waiting long and came back quickly. The man's excitement grew even more when he saw the amount of gold they brought. It was tempting enough for him to offer his shabby house in exchange for the gold right then and there. However, Yu turned down the offer right away. Not only did he know that the house wasn't worth that much, but even if it was, they needed to save some money for later. Besides, it was Seol's money, not his, so he couldn't just waste it like that. Hearing this, Seol grabbed the guy's hand, placed her head on his chest, and gently reminded him that the gold belonged to both of them, not just her. Like a pair of lovebirds, they started messing around, rubbing against each other and completely ignoring the landlord, who was standing there on the verge of losing his patience because of their childish behavior. Still, he didn't say anything, and the all of them just headed back to their place, continuing their playful antics without a care for the landlord. Trying to act like he wasn't bothered, the man suddenly started talking about his plans for the house, asking Yu to take good care of it since he wanted to rent it out in the future. Yu didn't hesitate to reassure him, promising that he wouldn't let the house take even the slightest damage from now on. He hadn't even finished talking when, all of a sudden, his face and the surroundings lit up with a sudden burst of lightning. It seemed like fate was determined to mess with Yu, as he quickly realized that the house they were just talking about was now up in flames. It didn't take long for the other villagers to notice and gather around to watch the spectacle. Meanwhile, the landlord and Yu stood there in complete shock, frozen as they watched the house being devoured by fire. Slowly, the landlord reached for the bag of gold and took it, believing that Yu was responsible for the house's safety. Yu just stood there, his eyes and mouth wide open, too stunned to even try stopping him from taking the money. Things only got worse when, out of the flames, the pink-haired girl from earlier suddenly leapt forward, grinning smugly as she proudly announced she was the one behind it all. As soon as her feet hit the ground, she called out Yu's title like she'd known him forever and went on to introduce herself. "I'm the next head of the Four Heavens cult, the Poisonous Phoenix, Tang Hai." But instead of looking intimidating, she was more like a hyper 13-year-old, flat-chested and full of energy, practically bouncing as she yelled that she was there for one reason only: to assassinate him. Aside from Yu and his landlord, who were both completely caught off guard by all these unexpected events, the crowd was eager to see what would happen next. Tang Hai stood there fearlessly, all alone in front of the roaring flames, while the rest of the villagers formed a circle around her, watching intently. After what she clearly thought was an epic entrance, she immediately challenged the demon sword of chaos, giving Yu the chance to make the first move. But before she could finish basking in her moment, two massive waves of lightning suddenly shot toward her. The deadly blasts weren't aimed directly at her but passed close enough to make their presence known, destroying what little remained of the burning house behind her. In an instant, Tang froze, caught off guard by the unexpected attack, and for the first time, her confidence wavered. That's when Seol stepped forward, her expression cold and determined. She announced that if Tang wanted to fight, she'd have to face her first before even thinking about going after Yu. Seol made it clear she could have ended Tang right then and there, but chose to play fair. This time, though, she wasn't holding back. She was ready to take down anyone who insulted the only reason she lived and breathed. Instead of retreating, Tang smirked, her confidence quickly returning, and declared she was more than ready to face Seol. "Long time no see, Lunar Sword," she said with a challenging grin, making it clear she was already familiar with her opponent. Lady Seol kept walking forward, surrounded by a glowing white aura and flashes of light. Ahead of her stood the overly confident, flat-chested kid, her body radiating a green flame-like energy, waiting to confront her. Tang Hai hadn't expected to run into Seol on her way to capture Yu, or at least pretended to, but she still believed Seol was no big deal and wouldn't be much of a challenge. Seol paused for a moment, visibly annoyed by Tang, who was rambling on and on like an overly excited child. Watching Seol's expression, Tang decided not to waste any more time and show her exactly what she was capable of. With confidence, she launched her secret move, fully intending to finish Seol off in one blow. Unfortunately for Tang, her plan failed miserably. Within seconds, she was half buried in the dirt, with only her head and chest sticking out. She was completely stunned at how easily she had been defeated. In the meantime, nearby villagers worked together to put out the flames that had engulfed the house. The boy didn't seem to care much about the damage, unlike the landlord, who wanted to make Tang to pay for his house. Instead, he was more focused on figuring out why this hyperactive kid had suddenly shown up, burned his house down, and tried to assassinate him. Tang, despite being defeated and captured, refused to admit anything. She acted like she was the victim in all this, and Demon Sword of Chaos was harassing her. But in reality, this was all part of her plan. As the heir to a powerful noble family, Tang wasn't about to go down without a fight, so she just needed to buy herself some time to come up with something. Just then, someone suddenly descended from the sky, landing right in the middle of the scene. It was, of course, Tang's loyal underling, a skilled martial artist. As Tang shouted, "Come forth, my royal and excellent assistant," Seol calmly placed her hand on the woman's head and used her abilities to bury her in the ground, just like she had done to Tang earlier. Tang was making a huge fuss, calling that woman every mighty and impressive title she could think of. But within seconds, before she could even realize it, her hope turned into pure disappointment when her assistant was completely defeated in a flash. Yu, watching the whole thing from a distance, was stunned. He couldn't believe how Seol single-handedly took down these two so-called skilled women in such a one-sided battle. Later, after the chaos had settled down, Yu questioned the pair to figure out why they had caused all this trouble. Tang, still brimming with misplaced confidence, boldly claimed she was just doing her duty as a hero and trying to save the world from its greatest enemy. She explained that since she couldn't find Yu at his house, she came up with a simple strategy, burning the house down to force him to return. It was a statement that definitely didn't sit well with the landlord, who wasn't thrilled to hear about her destructive plan. Moments later, Yu was completely shocked when Tang brought up one of the countless rumors she'd heard recently. She claimed that the so-called Demon Sword of Chaos had taken Seol's parents hostage and was forcing her to do whatever he wanted. Tang even said one of her reasons for coming here was to rescue Seol and free her parents. Yu suddenly froze, his mind racing. Something didn't add up. Just moments ago, Tang had been trying to kill Seol, and now she was claiming she came here to save her because of some rumors? It didn't make any sense. Tang seemed to be hiding her real intentions, but to her surprise, her own assistant, the one she proudly called the Silent Demon previously, decided to spill the truth. The assistant bluntly revealed that Tang's actual goal was to use this opportunity to catch the lunar sword off guard and assassinate her, not the boy. Seol, who had been watching the whole scene with curiosity, listened carefully, wondering why Tang had targeted her. The Silent Demon didn't hold back, laying everything out in the open. She explained that it all started a year ago during a martial arts competition, where Tang had been utterly defeated by the lunar sword. Tang, clearly panicking, tried to shut her assistant up. She yanked at her long hair, smacking it into the woman's face in an attempt to get her to stop talking. "You're my underling, not theirs," Tang hissed, desperate to make her come to her senses. But the assistant completely ignored her and just kept spilling the truth. The Silent Demon glanced at the aftermath of Seol's earlier attack and admitted that she too had wanted to go after her, not just to avenge Tang's defeat, but also to make a name for herself. However, she knew she wasn't strong enough to take the famous lunar sword on, so she didn't dare make a move until now. Yu watched in surprise as the woman went on to declare that she had also come here after hearing the same rumors, stating she planned to make a name for herself by killing two birds with one stone. The plan? Knock the Demon Sword of Chaos out, take him down, and then swoop in as the hero who saved the lunar sword. After hearing this bizarre story, Yu and Seol exchanged confused looks. Were these two supposed to be master and subordinate, or were they just two random strangers who only cared about themselves? Tang, unable to handle the humiliation any longer, suddenly let out a scream that sounded like someone had just poked her in the butt with something sharp. In her frustration, Tang finally started admitting everything, confirming what her assistant had said about her true intentions. She confessed that Seol's overwhelming power hadn't just humiliated her, it had made her realize there were probably countless others out there like her, counting down the seconds, waiting for their chance to take revenge on Seol. Seol, on the other hand, didn't bother saying anything, neither to defend her reputation nor to explain her true intentions. Just then, Tang ordered her less than trustworthy assistant to move on to the backup plan before things got any worse. At first, the talkative demon didn't seem interested in cooperating. However, when Tang kept pushing, she suddenly sprang to life, leaping out of her grave and freeing herself in one swift motion. In the blink of an eye, she appeared right in front of Yu, catching him completely off guard. He realized he had let his guard down, but deep down, he knew it wouldn't have mattered. Even if he had been on high alert, as a third-rate warrior, he couldn't have reacted in time anyway. Their gazes locked, the silent demon, ready to do her job, and the boy, bracing himself to be torn apart. Seol, who had also let her guard down and hadn't seen this coming, quickly tried to step in and protect Yu, but in the very next moment, her eyes widened in shock. The demon didn't harm Yu. Instead, she appeared on top of a nearby cliff, with someone else standing close to her. Tang's expression shifted, turning into that of a cheerful, overly confident kid again. She said casually, "This wasn't really what I wanted to do, but you forced me to use this dirty trick." That's when everything started to come to light. The silent demon suddenly brought out a 100-year-old granny from nowhere and held a knife to her throat. Yu reacted like he recognized the old woman, like she looked really familiar to him. Seeing this gave Tang her confidence back. She shouted at Yu to surrender immediately before she used his precious hostage against him to force his hand. Unfortunately for Tang, Yu didn't actually know who the granny was. He just felt sorry for her. That's when the atmosphere turned heavy, and an awkward silence filled the air. Everyone stood there watching him in shock. Tang, however, didn't buy it. She thought the so-called demon sword was just pretending not to know the granny so he wouldn't lose the upper hand. To snap him out of it, Tang yelled, "It's your mother, the one who gave birth to you. How can you say you don't know her?" Yu scratched his ugly face awkwardly and looked sad. After a moment of hesitation, he finally said, "My mom, she died when I was only 5. Tang was speechless. Her eyes went wide and her mouth hung open in disbelief. But her shock didn't last long because everything was confirmed when the granny suddenly started shouting in anger. "My lost son's name is Hyeol, not Hyeol." She went on to remind everyone, as if scolding them, that she had told them this many times before. Just as everything seemed to calm down, and Tang realized she had seriously messed up this time, an wild but effective idea suddenly popped into her head. Since she had nothing to lose at this point, she decided to create a massive scene. She started shouting and screaming at the top of her lungs, making a fuss about why Yu didn't care about his mother's safety and why he wouldn't just surrender. She didn't hold back, exaggerating everything even though she knew perfectly well that the old woman wasn't related to Yu. Surprisingly, the granny decided to cooperate with Tang and the silent demon. She suddenly began crying out for help, begging as if her life really depended on Yu's actions. Yu, caught off guard, fell right into their trap. He awkwardly wanted to put an end to the madness, but at the same time, he didn't want to surrender and throw his life away. That's when Tang's plan started to work. The commotion drew a crowd as people gathered to see what all the noise and chaos were about. Things quickly escalated for Yu as onlookers began judging him harshly, saying things like, "What kind of person wouldn't care if his mother was killed?" Or, "Would he really cut ties with his own mother just to save himself?" Yu knew deep down that the granny wasn't his mother, but hearing all those ridiculous accusations from the crowd made him start to doubt himself. The pressure was getting to him, and he began reconsidering whether he should just do what Tang wanted to put an end to it all. But Tang's plan turned out to be a double-edged sword. Some of the onlookers shifted their attention to her, questioning her actions and mocking her. They called her a weirdo for giving herself the nickname Poisonous Phoenix and claiming to be the head of a noble family. Just like Yu, Tang found it hard to handle the judgment and ridicule. It was karma for her actions, and she was utterly helpless against it. However, being a 13-year-old flat-chested, hyperactive kid, she couldn't stand hearing those insults thrown at her like that. So, she decided to act. With a bit of effort, she pulled her small, half-buried body out of the ground. As soon as Tang got free, she called out to Yu, making both Seol and the boy turn around, only to realize their little troublemaker was on the loose again. This time, Tang wasn't in the mood to waste time messing around or giving some childish speech. Instead, she pulled out 8 poisonous darts from who knows where and declared it was time to settle everything once and for all and make a run for it. Poor Yu was left completely stunned. He barely had a second to catch his breath before things escalated even more. Every moment felt like it was spiraling further out of control, and now it had reached its breaking point. Without any hesitation, Tang threw all 8 darts at once, aiming straight for Yu, and probably Seol too. As expected, Lady Seol effortlessly blocked all the incoming threats like it wasn't something she even needed to worry about. But what Seol didn't realize was that Tang had only been causing a scene to grab her attention, and it worked. The real danger was behind her. The silent demon had quietly aimed much larger darts at them. Lady Seolhwa, despite everything, managed to block the dart at the very last second before it could hit her. But unfortunately, that wasn't the only dart the silent demon had thrown. Another one had been aimed at Hyeol, and she hadn't noticed it in time to block it. Being completely useless and unskilled, Yu just stood there, doing absolutely nothing. He didn't even try to dodge. Instead, he simply accepted the dart with open arms. But the moment it hit him, he quickly realized he should have at least tried to move out of the way. The pain was unbearable. Seeing this, Lady Seolhwa was left stunned. She couldn't believe what she was witnessing. The thought hit her hard. Her future husband might actually die because she underestimated their enemies. The poisonous dart didn't just hit the boy, it went straight through him, like it was as fast as a bullet. Seolhwa ran toward Yu and caught him in her arms. Even the landlord rushed over, panicking, afraid this might be the boy's final moments. Lady Seolhwa couldn't stop blaming herself for everything, convinced it was all her fault. Her eyes filled with tears of regret, thinking that she could have saved Yu if only she'd noticed the sneaky attack a second earlier. She was sure Yu was done for, but when she looked at him, she realized he didn't look like someone on the verge of death. And then, to her shock, Yu said something strange. He didn't feel any pain at all, like he was totally fine. He just felt a little dizzy. Hearing this, Seolhwa hugged him tightly, overwhelmed with relief that her ugly boyfriend was okay. Yu, feeling better now, hugged her back and apologized for making her worry so much. The landlord, on the other hand, stood there frozen, not because of their emotional embrace, but because he was absolutely certain the dart had pierced Yu's body and gone right through him. Seolhwa had the same question burning in her mind. How could he be completely fine after something like that? Yu admitted he'd felt the impact too, but he brushed it off, thinking it was something as small as a needle. That's why he believed he was okay. Tang was listening to their conversation but decided to crush their hopes by saying those darts were coated with the deadliest venom, one that no one could survive. Standing there in her mismatched pants, she held up a small bottle of venom and called it the 100 fragrant root poison. Yu believed her instantly, horrified to realize it was the most potent poison from Tang's clan. The flat-chested girl went on to explain that the poison must have already started spreading through Yu's body. She said that soon, when it reached his body's core, he would die in the most excruciating pain. Yu wasn't feeling anything yet, but he was frozen in shock, wondering how such a tiny amount of poison on a single dart could do all of that before killing him. Then Tang revealed the final, chilling secret behind the poison. She explained that the reason it was considered the deadliest was because it spread and multiplied using internal energy. The stronger someone's internal energy, the more lethal the poison became. At that moment, Yu suddenly understood why he wasn't feeling any pain. For someone like him, with zero internal energy, the poison was completely useless, like smoking a cigarette and expecting instant death. Tang, however, didn't know that. She had assumed that someone carrying the Demon Sword of Chaos title would have an absurd amount of internal energy, enough to make the poison 100 times deadlier than it would be for an ordinary person. She was so sure of her assumption that she just stood there, waiting to see Yu collapse and die at any moment. But nothing happened. The only thing Yu felt was a slight stinging sensation at the spot where the dart, or needle, had hit him. On the other hand, the pre-active kid couldn't help but wonder if she had miscalculated the timing or something, because by now the poison should have at least started showing some side effects. Before anything serious could happen, the landlord hurried off to grab some medicine, just in case. Meanwhile, Lady Seolhwa started crying again, bawling like a little kid, thinking that because of her mistake, Yu could actually be dead by now. A little distance away, Tang was staring at her dart, or needle, or whatever it was, wondering if she had forgotten to poison it. If that wasn't the case, then why wasn't the poison doing anything to the guy? Glancing at her poison bottle, the flat-chested, overly eager girl began to wonder if she had accidentally used something else instead of her clan's venom. To confirm her suspicion, she decided to test it out. Tang lightly tapped her pointer finger on the tip of the needle. It only took a few seconds for Seolhwa and Yu to notice something was seriously wrong with the overly eager girl. That tiny amount of poison that entered her body with that tap was enough to send her into extreme agony, exactly the kind of pain she had expected Yu to feel. But at least now, she was sure the poison was working perfectly fine. Hours, or maybe even days later, in an unknown place, after being lucky enough to have survived, Tang slowly started to regain consciousness. It didn't take long for her to recall the last thing that happened to her. She immediately sat up on the bed she was resting on and shouted, "Where am I?" Yu was sitting a little farther away, waiting for her to wake up. Without much emotion, he casually answered her question with, "You're in the village clinic." The last thing Tang expected to see was the so-called Demon Sword of Chaos acting like he actually cared about her well-being. The boy didn't miss the chance to tease her and explained with a smirk how he had brought her there after her spectacular seizure on the ground. Then, with a creepy grin on his face, Yu added that they could continue and settle everything that got left unfinished before she passed out, if she was up for it. But Tang wasn't in any condition to do anything. Her body was still visibly trembling, the lingering effects of the venom reminding her just how potent her poison really was. She couldn't help but think that Yu must be someone who had achieved ultimate mastery over controlling internal energy, so perfect that even her deadly poison couldn't harm him. In simple terms, only someone as powerful as a sect leader could have pulled that off. Still clueless about the truth, Tang turned to Yu and asked, "Why did you spare my life, even after I tried to kill you multiple times?" According to Yu, actually Seol had been angry enough to let Tang die for hurting her precious boyfriend, but it seemed he had insisted on saving her. Yu claimed he convinced Seol by saying he had some unfinished business that only the two of them could handle. The flat-chested girl froze for a moment, realizing she was nothing more than a hopeless kid in front of him, thinking if even the lunar sword had surrendered to him, then someone like her had no choice but to accept whatever he said. Clenching her fists in frustration, Tang hated the idea of being defenseless and humiliated like this. She had dreamed of becoming a righteous hero, yet here she was, ending up as some kind of servant to a devilish guy. But as much as it burned her, she also realized something else. The rumors weren't true. It didn't seem there was any hostage situation or brainwashing that forced the lunar sword to defend this guy. Yu, still wearing his deadly serious expression, interrupted her thoughts and cut straight to the point, stating what they needed to do next. But the moment he mentioned her family and clan's name, before he could even finish, Tang jumped in and interrupted him. She might have looked like an impulsive kid, but she wasn't about to let her family take the heat for her actions. Firmly, she announced that she would personally take full responsibility for whatever he wanted her to do. That's when Yu didn't hold back and bluntly stated that she owed him 10,000 gold coins for the burnt-down house and, oh, some extra for all the trouble she caused him. Without a second thought, she agreed, thinking she could easily gather the gold and pay him off. But here's the catch. There was a huge problem. Yu wanted the first payment right now. Tang, on the other hand, didn't even have a single gold coin to her name, so Yu decided to get creative. There, he suggested she could do something instead if she really wanted to pay off the debt faster. And no, it wasn't that kind of dirty thing you might be thinking. Instead, they headed to the landlord's guest house, where Tang was stuck working as an attendant for him. She'd have to keep at it long enough to clear her debt before she could go. Now, as a noble girl and a martial artist, Tang struggled hard with her new job. For the most part, it was a nightmare. She couldn't stop complaining to Yu every chance she got. She never imagined the demon sword would drag her into something like this, working to pay off her debt. In her head, she thought Yu and his waifu were planning to do something forbidden or sinister to her body, but nope, it was just her wild imagination running loose. She snapped out of her daydream the moment someone shouted, "4 guests just arrived. They need service on the 2nd floor." Before Tang could even react, Seol, in front of everyone, like they didn't even exist, plopped herself right onto Yu's legs and rested her head on his chest. She seemed a little suspicious that Tang might be up to something shady or planning to hurt him in some way, so even when Yu told her to get up, she flat out refused. Yu, on the other hand, calmly explained that he didn't think Tang would try anything. He believed she wasn't going anywhere or doing anything to hurt him. She had already admitted her mistake and was willing to make up for it, no matter how long it took or how much they made her suffer. And with Seol being all cute and lovely on his lap, Yu couldn't even bring himself to think about forcing Tang to pay off her debt in any dirty or twisted way. The girl got convinced, but from the way Yu was acting like barely holding himself back, making it clear for Seol that something was bothering him. For a split second, Seol wondered if maybe her weight was bothering him, or if he was just embarrassed to be in such a situation in public. She attempted to get up and head back to her seat, but before she could, Yu wrapped his arm around her waist and stopped her. Even if he was a little embarrassed, he wasn't about to hold back from comforting the love of his life, even in public. And just like that, the two of them went right back to acting like lovesick teenagers, rubbing and fondling each other like no one else was in the room. Nobody around could handle watching that scene, but the landlord and Tang were the exceptions. They just stand there, wondering how on earth that adorable goddess could be so in love with that ugly, no-good rascal. Meanwhile, in a city on the other side of the country, Tang's assistant was making her way through a packed, noisy street, feeling absolutely miserable from the heat. Even though it was spring, the temperature was unbearable for her. That was until she revealed her little secret. She'd been hiding her true identity under a perfectly crafted mask this whole time, but since no one in this city would recognize her anyway, and to help herself cool down, she decided to take it off. As soon as she did, she felt a lot better. She figured she could rest here for a while before the next time she crossed paths with Hyeol and Lady Seol, a moment she couldn't wait to experience again. Later that day, Yu found himself training hard in a quiet spot, while Seolhwa watched him from a safe distance. Just from repeatedly swinging his sword, Yu was already panting heavily. He felt completely exhausted, but the thought of how lucky he was to survive this time pushed him to work harder because he didn't want to be a burden on anyone anymore. Despite his body looking like that of a well-trained martial artist, he lacked even the basic knowledge of mastering internal energy techniques. As someone with low skills but a big title, he turned to Seolhwa, hoping she might give him some advice to speed up his progress. To his surprise, Seolhwa quickly averted her gaze, pretending to look somewhere else. Yu walked closer and asked her directly for advice as the martial arts master she was. Finally, Seolhwa stood up, acting like she's ready to show him something. At that moment, Yu couldn't help but reflect on how weak he really was, bottom tier, even among third-rate warriors. The thought of the huge gap between him and Seolhwa made him feel embarrassed, yet he couldn't deny how much she still loved him despite it. When Seolhwa reached him, she sat down and touched his six-pack, pointing out that his physical strength was already well built, so what he needed to focus on was improving his internal energy. Then, in a surprising moment, as if she couldn't resist, Seolhwa threw herself into Yu's arms. Pressing her soft body against his, she acted like she was completely losing control just from looking at him. Not long after, they returned to the village, or town, or whatever it was, and since Tang had already blown up his house, they went back to the only place they had left to stay, the landlord's inn. There, Seol tried to cheer up her ugly boyfriend and boost his confidence, reassuring him that he didn't need to worry too much about his inner energy because she would help him circulate his chi. But there was a small issue. Since Seol had never actually done that kind of training before, she thought it would be best to align their vital energy cores first before doing anything else. Without really understanding what that meant, Yu got excited, thinking he was finally going to gain some internal energy soon. However, as he recalled the locations of each vital energy center in his mind, Yu started to feel a little uneasy. Looking at Seol's body, from the base of her butt to the middle of her chest and up to above her neck, he suddenly realized exactly what she meant by aligning their energy cores. It was strange to see someone as beautiful as Seol turn out to be such a shameless pervert. As expected, she slammed the door shut, ready to start their one-on-one, intense aligning. However, that flat-chested, overly enthusiastic brat wasn't about to let Seol do her training properly. Without warning, Tang threw several darts from behind the door, not even knowing exactly where they would land. Then, like a jealous girl, she burst into their room, acting as if she had heard everything and insisting she wanted to join the training. But the issue was, Tang hadn't expected their training to be something only appropriate for fully grown adults. Things got awkward pretty quickly. However, the situation was resolved soon enough when Seol used her star absorption technique. The result was predictable. Tang ended up beaten up on the floor with a bruised and swollen face, while Seol stood protectively in front of Yu, clearly furious that Tang not only interrupted their training, but had seen her lover naked. After all the drama, the landlord came rushing up to the second floor of his inn, demanding to know what was going on. At first, he was completely shocked by the scene in front of him. But once he figured out what had happened, his shock quickly turned into anger. He stormed toward Yu and started yelling at him for destroying and trashing his inn again, especially after he had pitifully agreed to let them stay there. Poor Yu, who hadn't done anything at all, was left taking all the blame. The landlord didn't dare say a word against the lunar sword or that overly energetic kid, so Yu became the easy target. Just then, a woman arrived at the scene and announced, "From what I just heard, it seems I came to the right place at the right time." Whoever she was, she managed to catch Hyeol's attention amidst the small chaos. Naturally, it turned out to be Yu's sugar mommy, Hang Kyung, who had come to visit him after hearing about everything that had happened recently. It seemed Tang hadn't met the sugar mommy before, so she didn't recognize her. Yu, on the other hand, knew exactly who she was but hadn't expected to see her at a moment like this. Among the group, the only one who seemed genuinely happy to see Hang was the landlord. He started practically begging for help, asking if she could stop the lunar sword from killing him for raising his voice at her boyfriend. Hang, however, didn't pay the landlord any attention. She was there for a different reason, to make a proposal. She mentioned she had a great job lined up that would help them earn enough money to rent a much better place for themselves. Without asking too many questions about what the mission actually was, they agreed to it on the spot. Hours later, a carriage was making its way through the middle of nowhere, completely unaware of the danger lurking ahead. Hidden in the shadows, a group of bandits lay in wait. Moments later, they leapt out from their hiding spots, blocking the carriage and cutting off its path. Without hesitation and full of confidence, the bald bandit strode up to the back of the carriage and demanded the merchants kindly hand over some of their belongings before they lost their lives. But what he didn't expect to find was 4 intimidating figures waiting for him inside. The sight of them made him feel like a helpless little bug caught in the web of 4 giant spiders. Realizing the mess he just walked into, he immediately took back everything he had said, nervously wishing them a good and safe trip. However, Seolhwa wasn't about to let him off the hook so easily. Seeing his desperate situation, the thief tried his best to calm them down, awkwardly playing it off like the whole thing was just one big misunderstanding. It didn't matter much though. Not only him, but his entire gang ended up getting a well-deserved lesson from Seol before they could scurry away. A short while later, the group of Big Four continued on their journey, guarding a caravan. There, Hang Kyung, as calm and composed as ever, declared that dealing with those worthless bandits was nothing compared to what lay ahead. According to her, their biggest challenge would be facing the notorious Green Forest Bandits. Based on what Hang knew, the Green Forest Bandits were on a completely different level from the usual riffraff. They were smarter, more skilled, and operated as a branch of a larger organization connected to a main headquarters. Recently, these bandits had grown wilder, attacking everything that passed through the area, and since Hang was carrying something particularly important, she needed their help to ensure it arrived safely. Yu was kind of glad to finally meet and help his sugar mommy after such a long time. He wasn't dumb enough to turn down the opportunity, especially with that massive payment involved. But there was one thing about this journey that he wasn't happy about. Someone was ruining their little love triangle. He pointed at Tang, that annoying pre-active kid, and asked why she had been brought along. Before the merchant leader could respond, Tang herself confidently spoke up, announcing that she was there to help innocent people fight against villains, and of course, to get her share of the reward and pay off her debts. Everything clicked for Yu at that moment. He realized she hadn't just come along to ruin his moments, but was also there to stir up trouble for some quick cash. Frustrated, Yu told Tang to head back and help the innkeeper with his work instead of hanging around and being a bother. As expected, though, she refused to go anywhere. It didn't take long for the situation to escalate when the loud sound of whistling broke through the air, catching everyone's attention. It was the signal. Time to face the Green Forest Bandits. This time, in an attempt to prove herself, Tang stepped forward and boldly told everyone to stay back and watch how she handled everything on her own. But the moment she saw the sheer number of bandits and their appearance, she instantly regretted her decision, realizing she might have acted a little too hastily. Despite being outnumbered, Tang tried to keep her cool and act all high and mighty, pretending like she was the one giving the bandits a chance to walk away before something bad happened to them. Seolhwa, however, appeared out of blue, already sensing why Tang was acting this way, like she was scared and didn't actually plan to do anything. Still, the flat-chested girl carried on with her act, pretending she was about to take down all the bandits single-handedly, only to get annoyed when Seol interrupted. Tang angrily shouted, demanding to know why Seol wouldn't let her finish the job. But when Seol completely ignored her tantrum, Tang decided to do something reckless to prove the lunar sword that she wasn't as weak as she looked. Determined not to let Seol look down on her, Tang pulled out some explosive darts at once and threw them, hoping to show off her skill and strength. At first, the bandits looked confused, unsure of what these darts were, but when they realized what was about to happen, their faces turned to horror as they figured out that the darts were about to blow them up. Before they could run or find any cover, the darts exploded with a massive bang, creating an impressive scene that left everyone stunned. The explosion not only surprised the bandits and the rest of the group, but even Tang herself. She hadn't expected such a wild explosion because she had never used these kinds of darts in such a number before. Everything might have been fine if Tang had just focused on dealing with the bandits instead of causing extra trouble for everyone. Before they could even confirm whether the bandits were alive or not, Yu and Hang realized their situation wasn't any better than the bandits. A landslide, triggered by the explosion, came crashing down from the cliff above the road. Yu had expected Tang to cause trouble, and that's exactly why he didn't agree with her being there in the first place, but he never imagined she'd end up nearly getting them all killed. The landslide hit fast, catching everyone off guard. Even in that situation, Seol tried to reach Yu, but the distance between them kept growing with every passing second. They were eventually split into two groups, Seol with Tang and Yu with his so-called sugar mommy. Soon later, the landslide finally slowed down, but it was unclear if any of them had survived the chaos. Meanwhile, deep in the forest, where a hidden cave served as the base for the Green Forest Bandits, one of the men questioned their boss. He wondered if sending such a small group for this mission had been a good idea. The boss, however, calmly replied that their purpose wasn't to win, but to test the carnival's security. Fully aware of how important this mission was, the boss announced that he had already requested reinforcements from the main base. He confidently added that the mission would officially begin once the person he called for help arrived. In the middle of his overly self-assured speech, one of his subordinates rushed in, looking panicked, and delivered news about the mission. He reported that their vanguard team had been completely wiped out. For a moment, the boss assumed the vanguard team must have been skilled enough to take care of the enemy all by themselves and began praising them in his head. However, his underling, drenched in sweat and struggling to explain, awkwardly clarified that not only had the caravan and its guards been destroyed, but every single member of their vanguard team had either been buried or burned to death. Elsewhere, far away from the chaos, Han Kyung, soaking wet and looking like she had just been rescued from a river, stared up at her savior half-conscious. Standing over her was none other than her ex-boyfriend, who seemed more than ready to rekindle their long-lost baby-making memories. Little did he know, a pair of watching eyes were already observing them from the shadows. Moments earlier, when Hang had separated from the rest of the team, and even from Yu, she was thrown by the landslide into the lake, sinking slowly without resistance. Memories of that early morning unintentionally flashed through her half-conscious mind. Perhaps it was what she believed would be the last thing she'd ever see. That morning, Han Kyung held a bounty poster of Hyeol in her hands, thinking it was finally time for the so-called demon sword of chaos to be of some use to her. One of her assistants approached her, questioning if trusting that guy for such an important mission was really a good idea. Hang had responded bluntly, saying that not only him, but no human deserved to be trusted. But fate had other plans. It decided to prove her wrong. Some guys, especially the ones with sugar mommies like her, turned out to be exceptions. Yu had sacrificed his own life to save Hang from certain death. As he stepped onto the land near the lake, carrying his precious mommy, Yu swore that if he ever got the chance, he'd give Tang Hai a punishment she'd never forget, especially after her last reckless and childish action that had nearly killed them all. Now, back in the present, after completing his rescue, Yu gently laid Hang's body on the ground and covered her with his cloak to keep her from catching a cold. Sitting beside her, Yu couldn't help but wonder what he was going to do. If the bandits found them, there'd be no one to save them this time. The thought of the word save made him worry a little about Seolhwa, wondering if she was okay. But knowing she was a skilled master at pretty much everything, he tried to calm himself with that thought. Still, it wasn't enough. Despite being alone again with Hang, he couldn't stop missing Seolhwa, especially since they had promised never to be separated, no matter what. In the middle of his dilemma, torn between worrying about Seolhwa or figuring out how to handle the situation with Hang, a sudden noise of someone approaching caught his attention. Yu's head snapped toward the sound, and to his shock, he realized they were surrounded by green forest bandits. He quickly glanced at the merchant leader and realized he was the only one who could protect both of them now. Yu jumped to his feet, grabbing his sword and shouting like he didn't even recognize the bandits, though deep down, he knew this was a do-or-die situation. Despite his panicked reaction, the bandits hesitated. From the way they were looking at him, it was clear they were starting to recognize Yu as the most feared villain in the world. But instead of attacking, all the bandits suddenly rushed forward in a frenzy, not to fight, but to admire him, like he was their favorite celebrity or something. Things got even weirder when the bandits assumed Yu had captured the merchant leader himself in such a short amount of time. The so-called demon sword of chaos was completely dumbfounded as he hadn't expected to find out he actually had fans who thought so highly of him. Not knowing what else to do and not wanting to disappoint them, he quickly improvised. He covered Hang's mouth with a piece of tattered cloth and started carrying her toward the green forest stronghold, pretending to cooperate with the bandits. Of course, this made them feel amazing, as if they were in on some grand plan. On their way, one of the bandits suddenly blurted out that he never expected their boss to call in the legendary demon sword of chaos for reinforcements. He wondered aloud why their boss had kept it a secret from them. The others chimed in, excitedly speculating if all those explosions and the landslide earlier were caused by Yu's special techniques. Hearing this, Yu suddenly turned his head and asked if any of them knew what had happened to the others, if they'd found any survivors from the caravan. But the bandits didn't have any information. They guessed that maybe someone back at their base might know something. Seizing the opportunity, Yu decided to use his unexpected title to his advantage. He ordered them to gather any information they could and report back to him as soon as they reached the stronghold. The bandits, thrilled to be taking orders from their so-called idol, eagerly agreed. Suddenly, one of the bandits, like something had just clicked in his head, asked Yu about the rumors he'd recently heard regarding his relationship with the merchant leader. Caught completely off guard, the awkward guy tried to play it cool, brushing it off as a misunderstanding and insisting it wasn't true. Luckily for him, the bandit seemed to buy it without question. Feeling relieved that he'd managed to dodge being exposed, Yu had no idea that Han Kyung was finally starting to wake up. The tied-up woman, still unaware of the current situation or the fact that Hyeol had saved her, could only recall her assistant's warning about not trusting the demon sword of chaos. Her suspicions deepened when she noticed the bandits practically worshipping him for supposedly capturing her and personally carrying her to their base. Yu couldn't help but think his sugar mommy was pulling the same stunt as before, just like the day she cooperated with him and saved him from Seolhwa. Now she seemed to be doing the same thing, acting like there was nothing between them. With a satisfied look, he shot Hang a secret wink to sarcastically thank her for whatever game she was playing. Yu, as clueless as ever, completely misread her expression. He thought she was just playing along to make things look more convincing, which only made things worse. Hang's frustration boiled over, and she was practically about to explode. Just then, the lead bandit announced that they were almost there and pointed ahead, proudly showing off their stronghold. Before anyone could react, Hang landed a solid knee strike to Yu's face, clearly trying to make him regret what she believed was a betrayal. But instead of reacting to her outrage, Yu rubbed his face and, completely ignoring her attack, stared ahead in disbelief. "Is this really a stronghold?" he blurted out. "It looks more like a military fortress." Knowing they were both going to be in serious trouble as soon as they entered the stronghold, Yu initially felt like he had no choice but to accept his fate. But then, something shifted in him. He felt a sudden urge to at least save his best sugar mommy. Yet, just as that thought crossed his mind, the image of Seol waiting for him flashed before his eyes, pushing him to pull himself together and figure out a way to escape this mess. Noticing him hesitate and shake slightly, one of the bandits asked what was wrong. But Yu, who had already come up with a plan, suddenly shouted that he needed to practice breath control immediately before entering the stronghold. The bandits, who clearly wouldn't dare question him, didn't just accept his excuse, they admired him even more, assuming he was about to train for some kind of ultimate technique. However, they still asked for permission to guard him while he practiced, just in case. With a sharp, intimidating side glance, Yu shut that idea down, declaring that he couldn't guarantee the safety of weaklings like them if they stayed nearby. Then, to their surprise, he started walking down a different path, refusing to leave the merchant leader behind even while claiming he needed to train. When the bandits asked why he was taking Hang with him, Yu casually acted like he needed her for some kind of intense exercise before beginning his actual practice. Hang, hearing and seeing all of this, was both shocked and horrified by what Yu had just implied, but deep down, something about the situation felt different. Minutes later, a woman's scream pierced the air. As expected, it was Hang Kyung, not from pain, but pure frustration as Yu removed the tattered cloth from her mouth and she had a chance to yell at him. She still believed Yu had actually betrayed her, and now, even in the situation, wanted to pull something shady. Furious, Hang insulted him, yelling that she would never want anything to do with him again. But when she caught a glimpse of Yu's cold, intimidating expression, she reluctantly decided to cooperate for now. To her complete disbelief, Yu suddenly untied her, placed his hands firmly on her shoulders, and thanked her deeply. He genuinely believed that the merchant leader had been pretending all along to support his story and make the bandits believe in him. Hang, on the other hand, was completely bewildered as she expected Yu to force her to exercise with him. She had no idea what had gotten into Yu or why he was suddenly thanking her as if she were doing him some sort of favor. After a few seconds of trying to process the bizarre situation, it finally clicked for her. Realizing what Yu was thinking, the sugar mommy decided to play along. She switched gears and started pretending like she was cooperating with him from the beginning, acting as if this was all part of her plan to convince the bandits to fully trust him. Once the tension settled and the immediate problem was smoothed over, Hang crossed her arms and glared at Yu. "Instead of wasting time with all this acting and pretending, why didn't you just take care of those weak bandits with your martial arts?" Being an awkward yet clever guy, Yu immediately came up with an excuse, saying he couldn't risk putting the life of someone as important as her in danger by fighting the bandits recklessly. It was an excuse that, to his relief, partly made sense to his sugar mommy. After hearing Yu's answer, which sort of convinced her, Hang suggested they use this chance to head down the mountain and escape. Yu, however, started acting awkwardly again, mumbling that he could only accompany her halfway because he needed to go somewhere else. That was all it took for Hang to lose her temper again. She stormed at him, demanding to know how his superego could even let him consider leaving his defenseless sugar mommy to wander through a forest full of bandits alone. Her loud voice caught unwanted attention. Someone in the distance suddenly shouted, "Who's there?" Panic set in as both Hang and Yu dropped to the ground, covering their mouths to avoid making any noise. Moments later, a bandit appeared at the edge of a cliff above them, swearing he'd heard a woman's voice coming from this direction. Fortunately for them, the bandit was blind and clueless enough to miss the two people crouched right below him. Completely unaware of their presence, the bandit started talking to someone else, sharing some unexpected news. To Hang and Yu's shock, the bandit revealed that the others had managed to capture the lunar sword, who had been part of the escorting team. According to him, and much to Yu's dismay, they hadn't been able to capture Seol until reinforcements arrived. Apparently, one of the reinforcement men had used a dirty trick to finally take her down. Yu was carefully listening to them, hoping to gather more details that could help him figure out what was happening to his love, but those bandits left without saying anything else. From his reaction, Hang quickly realized why this ungrateful boy wanted to leave her stranded in the middle of the forest. In order to convince him to give up on saving Seol, she reminded him that if the lunar sword couldn't win, then he had no chance against that reinforcement guy, who she was sure had to be someone extraordinary. Before Hang could finish her point, Yu cut her off, refusing to back down or turn around. To her surprise, Yu declared that in this situation, neither skill, numbers, nor anything else would stop him from going to rescue Seolhwa. He made a promise to himself. No matter what happened, he wouldn't let himself lose Seolhwa again or give her any reason to feel disappointed in him. Suddenly, Han Kyung felt a pang of jealousy. She blurted out, "So rescuing Seolhwa is more important than keeping your sugar mommy safe, huh, Hyeol?" But, as if she already knew the answer, she let out a deep sigh, dramatic as ever, like it came from the very bottom of her butt. She acted like she had no choice but to accept it. However, an idea began forming in her mind, one that might just change Yu's decision. To Yu's surprise, she suddenly started taking off her clothes one piece at a time, right in front of him, starting with her fancy girdle. He didn't expect Hang to pull such a bold and, frankly, ridiculous move to convince him to pick her side. Things seemed to be going smoothly for that cunning woman when she cheekily told him not to keep her waiting too long and to take off his own clothes as well. Yu, already flustered but trying to stay responsible, pointed out that they didn't have time for that kind of magical work right now. But, as usual, things didn't go the way he planned. Hang went ahead and started tearing up her clothes after taking them off completely, then grabbed some of Yu's clothes to wear instead. It turned out she had no sexual intentions. She just wanted to change their appearance and disguise themselves as bandits by using her own fancy dress. After realizing how important Seolhwa was to her boy, she made up her mind to personally help Yu rescue the person who mattered most to him. Yu, now standing there awkwardly and half-naked, couldn't help but feel embarrassed. He asked why he had to be the one running around without clothes. Hang, clearly amused and maybe a little impressed by his physique, replied that as a woman, she couldn't exactly walk around and let hundreds of bandits see her beautiful body without clothes. And since they didn't have any extras, a half-naked man was the only and obviously the best solution in her eyes. Later that evening, two lowly bandits were guarding the path leading to their stronghold when they noticed someone approaching. As it turned out, it was Yu and Hang, coming to rescue Seolhwa. The moment Yu realized the guards had spotted them, he started acting all friendly, like they'd known each other for ages. But the bandits weren't that stupid and quickly figured out that Hang and that scruffy guy were just pretending to be part of the Green Forest bandits. When their little act failed, Yu started to panic, thinking they should retreat for now. But the merchant leader, Hang, had a backup plan that he didn't know about. She let the bandits get closer and, out of nowhere, slapped one of them so hard that it frightened the other one. The guy dropped to the ground, stunned, and demanded to know what that was for. That's when Hang calmly reminded him that their boss had requested reinforcements from the main base. The poor bandit, still shocked, assumed Hang was the reinforcement his boss had sent. But the clever woman didn't stop there. She went on to confidently declare that she was the wife of the reinforcement leader and had come all this way after her husband. She even introduced Yu as her direct underling. The way she carried herself, so full of confidence, combined with how smoothly she explained the situation, completely sold the story to the guards. They bought it hook, line, and sinker, even dropping to their knees to beg for her forgiveness. Acting like she wanted to show them some mercy, Hang just told the bandits to lead the way and stop talking. Of course, the way she handled the whole situation left Yu completely impressed, and that's exactly what she wanted, to take another step toward winning Yu's heart again. As they got closer to the main building, they couldn't help but stare in awe, but their shock wasn't because the building was grand or impressive, it was because of the massive wreckage on top of it. They couldn't figure out what could have caused such destruction, except maybe an earthquake or a lightning strike. Sensing their curiosity, the uneasy bandits finally spoke up, mentioning that a few days ago, a sudden blue, laser-like lightning bolt had struck the main building and even destroyed part of the mountain. Yu immediately knew what had caused all that damage. It was Seolhwa's preemptive strike to warn that troublemaker kid the other day. He didn't say anything about it, but his reaction gave him away. Hang, being sharp as always, noticed there was something he wasn't telling her. Instead of coming clean or even giving her part of the truth, Yu suddenly said that he felt like he needed to start acting more responsibly and being her protector from now on. Hang, thinking Yu was being completely sincere, started blushing. She felt a little embarrassed but also hopeful, believing that maybe, just maybe, things were finally going to get better between them again. They finally arrived at the place they'd been searching for, the Stronghold's prison. As soon as they figured out where they were, Yu made a sudden attempt to knock out the bandits silently with what he thought was a professional move. But, as expected from a third-rate warrior, he completely botched it. The bandit just turned to him in surprise, confused by the weak attempt. Before the bandit could react further, Hang stepped in. Not wasting a second, she grabbed a stick and took care of the situation herself. Her method, though, was a bit messier, wilder, and with a lot more blood than Yu expected, but it didn't matter. They grabbed the prison keys and bolted, running as fast as they could to find Seolhwa and free her before anyone noticed what had happened. A short while later, they followed the path deeper into the prison and reached a cell at the far end. With a low, cautious voice, Yu started calling out for Seolhwa, hoping she was there. But what he didn't realize was that it wasn't Seolhwa's cell at all. Instead, it was the cell of the one person he hated the most, the overly enthusiastic kid, Tang. As Yu attempted to open the cell door, still thinking it was Seolhwa inside, Tang suddenly jumped forward. The dim light revealed her not-so-pleasant face as she cried out in surprise, announcing how shocked she was that they had come to rescue her. The moment Yu and Hong realized it wasn't Seolhwa, but Tang, they froze. For a brief second, they considered just leaving her behind and continuing their search for Seolhwa, but, against their better judgment, they decided to take her with them anyway. They quickly opened the cell door and untied the kid, immediately asking if she knew anything about where Seolhwa might be. Tang He, however, responded that ever since the landslide, she hadn't had a chance to see Seolhwa and even doubted if she was still alive. Hang instantly felt disappointed, or at least pretended to feel that way, wondering if there was something about the entire situation that made it seem as though the Green Forest bandits had known exactly what they were doing and had meticulously planned the ambush on her caravan from the very beginning. But now wasn't the time to dwell on those thoughts. She urged the others to move quickly before the patrol arrived and discovered them. That's when the flat-chested girl suddenly spoke up, casually declaring that they didn't need to worry too much about a patrol showing up. Tang explained that when they locked her up, the bandits had mentioned that if the prison door was ever opened, the entire stronghold's emergency bell would ring. Both Yu and Hang froze, stunned and bewildered. They couldn't believe what they were hearing. Why on earth hadn't this idiot mentioned that earlier? Before they could even react, they realized it was already too late. They were completely surrounded by dozens of bandits who had blocked their path and cornered them. At that moment, the boss of the Green Forest bandits stepped forward, grinning smugly, clearly pleased that his plan had worked. He admitted that he had set up this trap, knowing full well that they would come to rescue their comrades. Yu, as usual, completely lost hope, convinced they were about to be killed at any moment. Han Kyung was feeling just as hopeless, but she still turned to Tang Hai and asked her to hand over one of her explosive darts or bombs so they could blow everyone up together. Unfortunately, Tang had lost her coat, the one specifically designed to carry her weapons, so there was nothing they could use to fight back or even defend themselves against the bandits. This led to Hang and Tang breaking into an argument, blaming each other for the mess they were in and how they'd all ended up in such a dire situation. Meanwhile, Yu just stood there, frozen in place, completely overwhelmed and hopelessly trying to think of a way to escape the chaos. But it wasn't his silence that stopped the girls' bickering. What really stopped Hang and Tang was the sudden shift in the bandits' expressions, pure horror spreading across their faces. That's when the bandits recognized Yu. To their shock, they realized this guy was none other than the most infamous villain in history, the Demon Sword of Chaos. Unaware of how weak and unimpressive Yu actually was, the bandits saw him as a terrifying monster capable of tearing them all apart without breaking a sweat. Their fear was so palpable that it brought an unexpected sense of relief to Hang and Tang. Their expressions shifted, and they suddenly remembered that they had what they thought was a strong person on their side, a person who could save them from this mess. But while the girls felt reassured, Yu didn't feel the same at all. Instead, he felt like he was in even bigger trouble now. With everyone suddenly relying on him to save the day, the pressure only made everything harder for him to handle. The boss of the bandits also recognized Hyeol, confused and wondering why he, of all people, was the one who had come to rescue the prisoners. Sensing an opportunity, Tang quickly took advantage of the situation. She warned the bandits that if they wanted to survive, they should start begging. Maybe the demon sword would let them escape unharmed. Yu, being the only one who actually knew the truth, tried to play along and confirm what Tang was saying, but his voice was so shaky and unconvincing that it only made things worse. Then, one of them nervously approached their boss and suggested retreating before it was too late. That's when it hit Yu. Maybe, just this once, his infamous title was actually working in his favor. But before anyone could act, a massive figure emerged from the shadows, and a booming voice shouted for everyone to stop this nonsense. The sudden appearance of the man sent chills down everyone's spine. He was enormous, towering over everyone, and his presence alone was enough to make even the bandits seem small. This man turned out to be none other than one of the Green Forest's 8 evil elites, Woo Seok. Dressed in primitive-looking clothes that made him look like a caveman, he fearlessly approached the so-called Demon Sword of Chaos, showing no hesitation or fear. Like the others, Hang and Tang were stunned. They had thought things were finally turning in their favor, but now, with the arrival of Woo Seok, they realized this wasn't going to be as easy as they had hoped. Hang couldn't help but stare at the man's sheer size and intimidating physique. His presence made her wonder if this was the reinforcement the bandits had been counting on all along. Before she could come up with an answer, Woo Seok suddenly turned to Yu and asked why he was even there and what he wanted. The terrified boy was so clueless he didn't even know how to respond, but no one seemed to notice his confusion. Out of nowhere, The giant guy decided to take the peaceful route first, suggesting that Hyeol join forces with them instead of protecting those flat-chested girls. He even offered Yu a big cut of the ransom they'd earned from this mission. For a moment, Yu hesitated, like he was seriously considering switching sides. Seeing his reaction, Hang realized the worst was about to happen if she didn't act fast. She quickly reminded him about their contract and the bond they shared. With a smirk, Woo-suk told Hang to stay quiet and let Yu make his own decision, pointing out she wasn't in a position to interfere. That's when the merchant leader figured it out. If they were offering that much money, Yu, like so many others, might betray them and switch sides. The ugly, bald, caveman-looking guy extended his hand for a handshake to seal the deal, and Hang, feeling crushed, closed her eyes. She knew she might have to accept this harsh reality. To everyone's shock, Yu firmly rejected the handshake and the offer. He started shouting from the depths of his heart, saying he wasn't like them, someone who chases money and uses brute strength to take whatever he wants. With a picture of Seolhwa's childhood flashing in his mind, he finally answered the question Woo-seok had asked earlier about why he was there. He said he was there to make sure he'd never lose the person most precious to him again. As expected, his bravery and those heartfelt words made his sugar mommy visibly blush, clearly impressed. She looked at him like she just realized he was the very person she wanted to share her bed with again. Just then, someone entered the scene, not through a normal entrance, but by smashing through the prison wall. That person was, of course, none other than Seolhwa, completely enraged and furious. She looked ready to annihilate not just Woo-seok, but every single one of those bandits for daring to just facing her beloved boyfriend. Yu, Woo-seok, and everyone else froze mid-sentence, stunned as Seolhwa made her entrance like a total badass fighter.
In that cool spring evening, under the gentle moonlight, everyone in the prison courtyard was completely stunned after Seolhwa's dramatic entrance. Two things were painfully obvious to everyone there. First, Seolhwa was breathtakingly beautiful, which no one had ever seen a woman like her before. Second, she had this commanding presence, an intense, almost intimidating aura that seemed impossible for someone so gorgeous to have. The moment Seol spotted her fiancé, she rushed straight into his arms and hugged him tightly. Just like a pair of lovebirds, they immediately started fussing over each other, asking if the other was okay. Seolhwa couldn't hide her excitement at seeing you safe and sound, while you kept asking where Seolhwa had been all this time. Apologetically, Seolhwa explained that she'd searched every hut and watchtower in the area looking for him, but hadn't managed to find him until now. While the two of them were completely caught up in their own world, practically ignoring everyone else, Tang started to get annoyed. She yelled at them, unable to hide her irritation at their behavior. Naturally, Seolhwa wasn't impressed with Tang's attitude and shot her a glare in response. Tang, however, wasn't really paying attention to what was happening around her and just kept rambling on with her eyes closed. That's when Hang realized something bad was about to go down. Just a second later, Tang also caught on to what Hang had noticed, and she immediately stopped her pointless chatter. True to form, it was Seolhwa who was closing in on her, practically crackling with anger. The air around her seemed to sizzle with electricity, showing just how mad she was. But Seolhwa wasn't furious with Tang just for interrupting her moment with you. No, what really pushed her buttons was the way Tang always seemed to mess things up, putting everyone in danger just to prove herself, like what happened in Landslide. Trying to calm Seolhwa down, you gently placed his hands on her shoulders and reminded her that they were still on a mission to escort Hang Kiang's caravan. Seolhwa paused for a brief moment, but then her temper flared up again. She declared she'd take down anyone who dared threaten her fiancé, and as for Tang, she'd deal with her later. Just then, while Seolhwa was distracted by Tang, a massive axe suddenly swung at her from behind. Even though it came from her blind spot and she seemed distracted, Seolhwa reacted instantly and easily blocked Woo Sayak's sneaky attack. Woo Sayak had been standing there the whole time, watching their argument and finally deciding to jump in after being ignored. It was only then that you realized he'd completely forgotten about the bald guy. Woo, on the other hand, immediately recognized Seolhwa as the famous lunar sword as soon as she showed up. Clearly impressed by her strength and looks, Woo tried to bargain. He said he'd let you go if Seolhwa agreed to spend some private time with him, playing Mario. Seolhwa barely glanced at him, not even bothering to reply. Little did Woo know, this gorgeous and skilled woman had already promised herself to just one man, and she wasn't about to play Mario with anyone else. Woo didn't get what he wanted So he charged at Seolhwa, swinging his axe wildly in every direction. Not too far away, the boss, who had been scared stiff talking to you just moments ago, suddenly found his confidence and started mocking you and the others. He joked that even if you, the so-called demon sword of chaos, teamed up with Seolhwa, the famous lunar sword, they still wouldn't stand a chance against Wu Sayak. In his mind, Wu was just on a whole different level. Hearing this made you genuinely worried for Seolhwa. He made up his mind to do whatever he could to help her against that caveman-looking guy. But the next second, reality hit him. There really wasn't anything he could do to help, even if he wanted to. That feeling only grew stronger as he watched Seolhwa and Wu fight up close. You realized that if he jumped in, he'd probably just get in Seolhwa's way and give her more trouble protecting him. Turns out, the fight wasn't even close to what the boss thought it would be. Wu was the only one struggling. Seolhwa was just toying with him. She blocked every one of Wu's attacks with almost no effort, swinging her sword like it was second nature. Wu couldn't handle how casually Seolhwa was fighting him. He felt like she was humiliating him in front of everyone. But Seolhwa didn't even bother taking him seriously. Instead, she turned her attention to you and playfully announced that he needed to help her recharge her energy. Whatever grown-up thing she meant wasn't really the point. The comment pushed Wu from angry to absolutely furious, making him fight even more recklessly. Wu decided it was time to pull out his ultimate move. He started by bulking up. His body actually grew larger before everyone's eyes. Even Tang realized how dangerous things were getting. She tried to warn both Seolhwa and Yu to watch out. Then, out of nowhere, Wu leapt high into the air. With all his new strength, he gathered every ounce of power in his arms, clearly planning to end things with Seolhwa once and for all. You did his best to get Seolhwa's attention, urging her to turn around and see the danger coming their way. But Seolhwa was stubbornly focused on you, insisting she needed to recharge with him first before doing anything else. As Wu began to swing his massive axe, letting out a loud battle cry, you promised her, right then and there, that he'd help her recharge as much as she wanted, however she wanted, if she'd just turn and face the threat. That was finally enough to snap Seolhwa out of it and make her look at Wu. But by then, it seemed like it might already be too late. Wu's axe was coming down, ready to split her in half. However, in that split second, it was like time itself froze, or maybe Seolhwa just moved faster than anyone could see. In a flash, she swung her sword, and before Wu even knew what happened, he was sliced into two uneven pieces. The moment was so intense, Yu, Tang, and everyone else were left standing there, mouths hanging open in shock. They could barely process what they just witnessed. Seolhwa's strike was so powerful, it actually carved a brand new hole in the wall of the cave-like prison. That's when you suddenly grabbed Hang's hand, pulling her attention away from the chaos. She turned to him right away, curious about what Hyeol needed to say. That's when a woman's scream cut through the air, yelling that the hole wasn't big enough for her to get through. It didn't take long before Seol somehow managed to squeeze out of that tiny hole, with you in her arms and Tang clinging desperately to her foot, doing whatever she could not to get left behind. That long day finally ended, and by the next morning, you handed over the instrument that Hang had needed them to escort. Hang couldn't help but wonder how you managed to find it, especially after what Tang had done to the caravan. You just said that Seolhwa found it and kept it safe. When Hang asked where Seolhwa was so she could thank her in person, you explained that Seolhwa and Tang were off dealing with the leftover bandits who survived the landslide. Since Wu Sayak and the bandit gang leader had bounties on their heads, and Seolhwa had taken care of them, she could use the reward money to cover the losses, something that Tang, as part of the escort team, was supposed to handle anyway. Suddenly, Hang's mood shifted, and she asked you if they really couldn't touch anything except for this one thing. She'd hoped that you would treat her like you did in the old days, but with Seolhwa around, she already knew the answer. Hang quietly started to walk away, not even waiting for you to say anything. Just as she was about to disappear from view, Hang called out to you, making him wonder what she wanted this time. Looking a bit lost, Hang said she believed that as the demon sword of chaos, he was actually even stronger than the lunar sword, so Wu Sayak never stood a chance against him. He wasn't sure why she suddenly brought this up, but he figured she was misunderstanding him again, and like always, he couldn't really clear things up. That's when Hang finally got to her real question. She wanted to know why you hadn't just agreed to hand her over to the bandits, and accept Wu's deal, since it would have been the easiest and best way for him. You just looked confused, then casually explained that he'd made a promise to protect Hang no matter what, and he wasn't about to break it, no matter the situation. Hearing that, Hang's eyes went wide in surprise before a gentle smile spread across her face. At first, she admitted that it was true Yu was kind of responsible for the mess they'd all ended up in. Then she turned to him, and in a softer, more sincere voice, said she was now certain she'd found someone she could trust with her whole life, no matter what had happened before. A few minutes later, they all continued on together since Hang still needed to deliver the item, and they had to escort her until the job was done. They managed to pull it off, but somehow, Hyeol ended up chained and handcuffed in prison, and if that wasn't enough, he was sentenced to death under the country's strict laws. It all started the day before, right after they arrived. The deputy official from the province came by to confirm the bounty they brought in, which he did, and Hang Qiang thanked him when he said they get paid for catching those troublesome bandits for the government. A little ways off, you felt pretty awkward being in a town full of government folks, and Seolhwa was trying to help him relax. Just then, someone came up behind them, having heard everything they'd said. It was the chief magistrate of the province. He clearly couldn't stand having the demon sort of chaos right in front of him, but there wasn't anything he could do about it. After all, you had helped capture the bounty targets, and just this once the law was on his side. That's when Hang stepped in. She walked up to you, suddenly wrapped her arm around his, pressing it to her chest, and told the chief magistrate not to provoke him, saying you was the one who did the most of the job. With that, things calmed down for a while, and they all headed off to grab some food and rest. Even though Kong wanted to get closer to you, it just didn't happen. Same as usual, Seol took the opportunity. She started feeding you by chewing his food first and putting it right into his mouth. To change the subject and distract her own mind, Hang started explaining why the government actually decided to let you, the well-known demon sort of chaos, go free. She said it was because there's a rule that sometimes, if a criminal hasn't threatened the government before and does something helpful, they could be treated just like any regular citizen. After she explained this, Hang pulled out that special box from seemingly nowhere and mentioned that they'd be delivering it tomorrow. For some reason, she asked Hyeol to stay away when it was time for the delivery. Her reason was simple but surprising. The recipient of the item was a dragon. You looked totally confused, so Hang started to break it down for him, beginning with an explanation about qi. According to her, when someone's internal energy goes beyond what the physical body can handle, it becomes what's called qi. Back in the day, this was considered the peak of martial arts, and even now, with all the new techniques, it's still the gold standard for true masters. She went on to say that if someone reaches that level of mastery before turning 20, the martial arts world calls them dragons or phoenixes. Everyone else seemed to already know that story, except for our clueless friend, Yu, who looked amazed before Hang even finished. Suddenly, Tang jumped in, proudly announcing that she was one of the youngest phoenixes in the world and was known as the Poison Phoenix. As you'd expect, nobody really took her seriously, especially after seeing her so-called skills with the bandits and that whole landslide incident. To get Tang to quiet down, Hang Qiang announced that the person they'd be meeting tomorrow is known as the Martial Dragon and is considered the future of Manhwa. But instead of calming down, Tang got even louder, saying she'd heard all kinds of stories about this person. When she tried to describe them for everyone else, though, all she could really say was that this person is abnormal even among abnormals. Her reaction was totally lost on you and Seol, who were more focused on taking every chance to get physically close to each other. As usual, Hang saw what was going on between you and Seol, got jealous, and decided to end the day there since the sun was already setting. She went over to the innkeeper and asked for a private room for 4 people. But before anything could be settled, Seol suddenly appeared, slammed her hand on the desk, and demanded 2 private rooms for 2 people each. She scared the living daylights out of everyone nearby. But to drive her point home, Seol insisted it was for the man's own good that she and you got their own room, something the innkeeper definitely wasn't going to argue with. Later that night, Tang returned to her room, feeling fresh after a good wash in a warm bath. To her surprise, she caught Hang trying to eavesdrop on whatever you and Seol were saying in their room. With Tang suddenly showing up, Hang got totally flustered. The petite girl, annoyed, warned the merchant woman not to act like a jealous kid, but Hang just told her to mind her own business, even though she was already blushing with embarrassment. Since Tang didn't care at all about the tangled relationships going on between those three, she just flopped on her bed and told her roommate to do the same, or at least keep quiet so she could get some sleep. The real action, though, was happening in the next room over. Yu was facing the wall, cheeks flushed, after Seol called for him to turn around. She'd just finished a long, relaxing bath, and had clearly gotten ready for what she hoped would be an unforgettable night. Seol, looking a bit giddy, reminded Yu that he'd promised to help recharge her energy when the time was right. And that time was now. Yu obviously remembered, but for some reason, he was acting like he wasn't up for it just yet. He tried to change the subject by commenting on Seol's new clothes, hoping to distract her. But Seol wasn't buying it. She just shrugged and said, "I borrowed it," then moved in so close that you could feel her warm breath. Yu leaned back against the wall, just staring at Seol for a moment without saying a word. That's when Seol wrapped her arms around him, her emotions clearly getting the better of her. But she still wanted to make sure it wasn't just her pushing things forward. So she quietly asked Yu to tell her how he really felt about what was about to happen between them. Before he could answer, she let him go for a second and told him to really look at her before saying anything. To make things even more tempting, she added with a playful grin that since she was all his tonight, he could decide how things would go and what would happen next. The not-so-handsome guy couldn't take it anymore and finally just went for it. He jumped up and hugged Seol back, telling her he'd love to do it any way she wanted. Hearing that made Seol feel even hotter. She smiled, grabbed Yu's hands, locked their fingers together, then pressed her chest against his. Laughing, she said that it didn't matter when or where, she'd always loved that ugly bastard. With that, they moved on to the final part of their mission before playing a full round of Mario. Meanwhile, Hang was standing on the other side of the wall, eavesdropping. When she realized what Yu and Seol were about to do, she couldn't help but feel jealous and a little upset at the same time. Suddenly, she noticed there was a commotion in the room. Hang was about to tell Tang to keep it down so she could listen in peace, but when she turned around, she saw something totally unexpected. A weird-looking owl was stealing their valuable item when Tang had completely passed out. The owl seemed trained for this, as it only came and grabbed the thing and started flying out the window. Hang just stood there, not quick enough to stop the owl. Only one thought ran through her mind, and it hit right as Seol and Yu's Mario game was about to get to the best part. Without even bothering to knock, Hang barged into their room and yelled for help. As you'd expect, Seol was furious because her recharge session had been interrupted right before it even officially started. That's when Hang suddenly found herself in a life-or-death situation. But luckily for her, Seolhwa missed her attack and accidentally hit the owl instead, just before it could fly off too far. Yu immediately recognized the special box and knew he had to act fast before it hit the ground. Without thinking, he sprang into action and managed to catch it midair. What he didn't realize, though, was that he jumped right out the window and had nothing to hold on to. With no one to break his fall, he came crashing down from the second floor faster than anyone could react. Strangely enough, he didn't get hurt at all, and as he sat up, surprised to find himself totally fine, but something suddenly scared him as the dust started to settle. You realized he was actually sitting on someone, and, to make things worse, there were guards surrounding him from every direction. That someone turned out to be the chief magistrate, who'd been knocked out cold with you landing right on his head. The guards immediately assumed this was an attack by the infamous demon sword of chaos. Yu was left completely stunned, unable to process how he'd managed to land himself in another huge misunderstanding, this one even more serious than before. Not far from there, a Shaolin monk being held somewhere that looked like a prison, and heard all the chaos going on outside, and wondered what on earth was happening so late at night. There was only one reason Yu wasn't in prison before. He wasn't considered a threat to the government. But now, that reason was gone. No matter how hard you tried to explain that he hadn't tackled the chief magistrate on purpose, nobody seemed to care. He ended up in chains and handcuffs, forced to spend quite a while behind bars. You even tried to apologize and clear things up, but that didn't work either, especially since the old man was still knocked out because of you. The guard didn't bother listening to a word you said. He just shoved you into the cell and told him to enjoy his time with the other guy, hinting that you shouldn't expect to get out anytime soon. Only then did you suddenly wonder if there really was anyone else in the cell. In one corner, he spotted the same bald guy from before. And as soon as he saw you, the man asked him to share his life story, saying it sounded like it could be interesting. You glared at him for a few seconds, but then realized there was something strange about this guy. He almost looked like he was glowing. At first, you thought he must be imagining things. People don't just light up like that. But as his eyes adjusted, he could tell the guy actually was glowing a bit, and it made you feel kind of uneasy. Sitting in front of him was the same Shaolin-looking dude, his bald head shining in the moonlight that streamed through the tiny window, almost like a big lamp in the darkness. Just then, the guy introduced himself as Guangdu, a disciple of the Manhwa sect. As soon as you heard Manhwa sect, his surprise grew. So this guy wasn't actually a Shaolin monk, even if he looked like one. Meanwhile, Guangdu stared at you, deep in thought. He had this nagging feeling he'd seen you's face somewhere before. It only took a few seconds for it to click. He recognized you as the infamous demon Sword of Chaos, probably from those wanted posters that were plastered everywhere. While he was stuck in prison, things were getting even wilder back at the inn. Seolhwa was more dangerous than a ticking time bomb after her mood was ruined and her fiancé got arrested. Hang kept a safe distance, trying to calm her down, but it wasn't working at all. Hang tried reasoning with her, saying she understood how Seolhwa felt, but storming government buildings or breaking you out of jail by force was just plain crazy. Seolhwa, practically crackling with anger, shot back that she didn't care if she became the enemy of the whole country. If it meant saving her fiancé, she'd fight anyone, even if she had to take them all out herself. Hang tried to warn her that rushing in recklessly would only put you in even more danger. That's when Seolhwa finally paused. Hang's words were starting to sink in. Noticing that Seolhwa was slowly calming down, Hang gently suggested they should focus on clearing up the misunderstanding first. If they could manage that, everything might turn out okay after all. To motivate Hang to do her absolute best, Seolhwa warned her, "If you get so much as a scratch, I'll wipe them all out. No questions asked." Hang already knew how serious Seolhwa was and promised she'd do everything she could to negotiate and use her influence to save you. But in the meantime, she insisted that Seolhwa and Tang stay put and let her handle things. That's when they realized Tang, their petite, flat-chested friend, was already gone. She was always up for causing trouble, and it looked like she was about to do it again. Sure enough, Tang had slipped out, no doubt planning to break you out of jail on her own. Exactly how she was going to pull it off was anyone's guess, but if anyone could stir up chaos, it was Tang. Back in the prison, Guangdu, with his shiny bald head, was genuinely impressed. You had just finished telling him everything, from how it all started to the endless misunderstandings and wild rumors that led to his reputation as the demon Sword of Chaos. Even after revealing the whole truth about his life, you was shocked that Guangdu actually believed him. No questions asked. It was an incredible feeling. For the first time ever, someone believed his side of the story instead of treating him like an enemy. Guangdu just smiled and said coolly that he never judged anyone by rumors or appearances, calling you his brother. Hearing those words, you couldn't help but get emotional. He actually teared up, deeply moved to find a true friend in the most unexpected place. For a few moments after that, they chatted about the guy with the shiny head, and then Hyeol started to wonder what the bald guy had done to end up in this cell. Even though it was a bit embarrassing for Guangdu, he began to share his own story. Apparently, when he first arrived in a nearby village, he saw a horse going wild in the marketplace, which, as it turned out, belonged to the village elder. Hyeol expected Guangdu to say he'd bravely calm the horse down, but to his surprise, Guangdu admitted that his shiny head actually scared the horse in the first place. But that wasn't even the real reason he landed in jail. The actual reason? He punched the village elder in the face after the old man started blaming him and getting in his way. Hyeol had no idea how to react to that. All he could do was pretend to feel sorry for Guangdu's unfair punishment. Guangdu didn't seem too upset, though. He cheerfully mentioned that it was his last day in jail and he'd be free tomorrow. He even promised to help Hyeol clear her name, but he said he had to run an errand for his master first. Guangdu explained that he had a mission to pick something up at the inn tomorrow. That's when Hyeol began to realize this might be connected to the special item Hang was supposed to give to someone. Before he could piece it all together, though, a sudden explosion shook the area, cutting their conversation short with a thunderous boom and a high-pitched voice yelling for the demon's Sword of Chaos. Of course, it was none other than Tang, the ever-energetic troublemaker, who loudly announced she'd come to rescue Hyeol. Both of them were shocked when they saw the little girl blow a hole in the prison wall, but Yu was especially stunned. It was the last thing he expected. Of all people, he never thought Tang would be the one barging in. His guess was confirmed when Tang cheerfully announced she'd come to break him out, but only if he paid her in gold worth 10 million yen. When you whispered for her to keep her voice down, since she was being even louder than the explosion, Tang just shrugged and said she'd already knocked out everyone on her way in, so there was nothing to worry about. Suddenly, the bald guy jumped in, recognizing Tang the moment she mentioned her stealth technique. Tang recognized Guangdu too. His shiny head made him pretty hard to forget, and it was clear they'd crossed paths before. But instead of focusing on the jailbreak, Tang started teasing the bald guy, making jokes about how a so-called disciple of the famous Manhwa sect ended up locked up in here. When she finally finished messing around with the Shaolin-looking guy, Guangdu asked her how she even knew Hyeol and why she was coming to his rescue. Tang dodged the question, just saying, "He owes me, that's all." Finally, Tang remembered why she was there in the first place and started working on Yu's handcuffs. As she did, you couldn't help but wonder if it was really okay for him to escape prison like this, even if Tang made it look easy. Guangdu knew this was the worst possible timing for him, but he still told Hyeol to get out of there before anyone found out what happened. At the last second, he said goodbye and hoped they'd meet again somewhere else. But just then, everything changed when Tang told Hyeol to hurry before Seolhwa showed up and wrecked the place. Just mentioning the name, Lunar Sword, made Guangdu's mood snap. Suddenly his whole body was glowing with a red aura. When the shiny-headed guy asked about the Lunar Sword, Tang casually explained that the Lunar Sword was actually the demon sword of Chaos's fiancée. As soon as Guangdu heard how close they were, always together in public, he couldn't hold back his emotions. He clenched his fist, and that's when Hyeol sensed something was off with him. Out of nowhere, Hyeol's foot slipped and he lost his balance, barely dodging Guangdu's powerful strike. Tang quickly pulled out her poison darts, thinking the bald guy had snapped, while Hyeol wondered what had gotten into him so suddenly. The shiny guy apologized for losing control for a moment and said he didn't have any personal issue with Hyeol. But then he grabbed his sword hidden behind the prison wall, right where Hyeol had dodged and his punch had smashed through. Trying to keep things quick, Guangdu announced he'd take care of Hyeol, not as the feared demon sword of chaos, but as the fiancé of the Lunar Sword. It wasn't clear why he hated Seolhwa, but he was clearly determined to take down Hyeol just because he was engaged to her. Guangdu's grudge against Seolhwa went way back to when he still had 4 lonely hairs clinging to his otherwise bald head. That was the first time he met Seolhwa during a tournament. He ended up losing to her, hardly able to put up a fight. Even then, the bald guy knew she was on a whole different level, and he really didn't stand a chance. Despite his crushing defeat, Guangdu actually felt pretty good about one thing. He managed to hang onto those 4 precious hairs. But things took a turn for the worse when Seolhwa grabbed him by those very same hairs and dragged him to the center of the arena, all while asking the referee if she'd officially won yet. At that moment, Guangdu wanted to scream from the bottom of his lungs, admit defeat, and beg Seolhwa to let go of his cherished hair. But after the beating he'd taken, no sound would come out, no matter how hard he tried. Before he could say a single word, he felt one of his hairs being yanked out. To Guangdu, these 4 strands were so precious that he'd actually given each one a name, as if they were close friends. The first to go was Chongrong. Then, not long after, he lost the second one, Bikyo. All Guangdu could do was cry over the loss of his beloved hair, which, to be honest, felt even more dear to him than some family members. Soon enough, the 3rd strand was gone, leaving him with just 1 hair left, standing tall and refusing to give in. But in the blink of an eye, that last one disappeared too. Suddenly, Guangdu became the first person on the continent with not a single hair left on his awkwardly shiny head. Tears streamed down his face as he realized how easily he'd lost what he'd worked so hard to protect, especially that last, most treasured hair that had only recently sprouted. After that day, when he lost not just the match, but also the things he valued most, Guangdu became like the sun itself, so blindingly shiny that no one could bear to look directly at him whenever he stepped outside. That was the whole story, and the real reason why Guangdu hated Seolhwa so much. Now, To make things even worse, Seol, the person he despised most, was heading right towards the spot where she was clearly worried that something might have happened to Hyeol. Meanwhile, not too far away, a door near the prison suddenly exploded open. Hyeol and Tang came sprinting out, with Gwangdu hot on their heels, completely losing it and desperate for revenge. He looked like he'd lost his mind, stumbling after them like a brain-dead zombie, determined to take something valuable from Seol to make up for what happened that day. As they ran, Hyeol couldn't help but wonder what had gotten into Gwangdu. Why did he suddenly seem totally possessed and out of control? Tang pointed out that it all started when she mentioned Seolhwa's name. Unlike Hyeol, Tang didn't seem scared at all. She insisted they shouldn't just keep running and suggested they face the bald guy head-on, not realizing that Hyeol was in no shape to stand up to Gwangdu. The thing is, Tang saw Hyeol as the infamous demon sword of chaos, so she thought he was just testing her. Hyeol had no clue what was going through Tang's head, but he was pretty sure she'd gotten the wrong idea again. Without warning, Tang suddenly skidded to a stop. Ignoring Hyeol's attempts to explain himself, she told him to keep going, shouting she was going to handle the bald guy herself. Since Tang had already scoped out the place earlier while looking for Hyeol, she knew exactly where his stuff was and showed him the way to find the belongings the guards had taken. Hyeol did what Tang said and headed in the direction she pointed out, thanking her for having his back. When Gwangdu noticed Hyeol getting away, he got even angrier and shouted at Tang to get out of his way. But Tang wasn't about to let that happen. In fact, she was actually curious to see what would happen if she, as a phoenix, squared off against Gwangdu, the dragon. She was looking forward to a good, long brawl. Meanwhile, Hyeol quickly reached the spot Tang had told him about and started searching around for his things. After just a few seconds of looking, his eyes landed on exactly what he was after. He immediately jumped forward and grabbed his stuff, feeling a rush of happiness just to have them back. No one else knew it, but that old sword and even that weird, grimy clock were really precious to Hyeol. After reclaiming his belongings, Hyeol decided to look for Hang's item, the one he'd saved, and ended up crashing onto the chief magistrate's head. As he searched, he spotted the deputy official of the province hiding in a corner, fiddling nervously with Hang's item. The moment their eyes met, both of them jumped in shock and started yelling in fear. Hyeol quickly pulled himself together and approached the deputy, asking why he was there and what he was doing with Hang's stuff. But before he could get an answer, another explosion suddenly went off behind him, sending him flying through the air for a moment. As expected, the chaos was coming from Tang and Gwangdu, who were still locked in an intense battle, completely ignoring everything else around them. Noticing she was starting to get pushed back, Tang decided it was time to pull out one of her best moves to stop Gwangdu. Without hesitation, she called out the name of her technique and unleashed a wave of poisonous shockwave straight at the bald guy. Gwangdu didn't flinch. He just stood his ground, letting Tang's attack get close enough before countering with his own unique and equally powerful technique. Their attacks collided and seemed to cancel each other out, disappearing into thin air. That's when Gwangdu finally spoke up, suggesting to Tang that they end this pointless fight. He made it clear he didn't care about the brawl at all. What he really wanted was to deal with Hyeol, Seolhwa's fiancée, and nothing else. Meanwhile, Hyeol stood a little ways off, completely clueless about why Gwangdu suddenly hated him so much so that he actually wanted to kill him. Hearing this, the bald guy repeated himself, saying he just wanted Hyeol gone because he was important to Seol, and that was reason enough for revenge. In a surprising twist, Tang, who is usually the troublemaker, actually tried to talk some sense into Gwangdu. She started off by listing all her own bad traits as if they were Hyeol's too, like being arrogant, reckless, and a bit of a troublesome. But then she admitted he had at least one good attribute, and that was a real sense of loyalty. The whole point of Tang saying all this was to remind Gwangdu that just a few minutes ago, they were calling each other brothers. That was exactly why Hyeol, despite being known as the most feared villain, was still choosing not to fight him. Suddenly, everything started to click for Gwangdu. Even though he already knew the truth about Hyeol, that little reminder was enough to help him calm down. Hyeol, on the other hand, didn't really see the bald guy as his brother or even a friend, to be honest, but he didn't dare say anything to disagree out loud. The shiny-headed Gwangdu started feeling embarrassed as he realized he'd let his emotions get the best of him, taking his anger out on someone who didn't deserve it. Just as he was about to apologize for his rude and, let's be honest, wild behavior, another explosion went off, cutting him off mid-sentence. Of course, it was Seolhwa, who leapt into Hyeol's arms again, looking super excited to pick up where their unfinished game had left off. Seeing this, Gwangdu froze in place, quietly whispering Seolhwa's name under his breath. Seolhwa noticed someone standing across the way and asked Hyeol if he knew who the bald guy was. That simple question was all it took to send Gwangdu right back into a rage, shifting the mood for everyone and threatening to set off the chaos all over again. After a series of explosions and all the loud commotion at the government building, everyone who lived nearby gathered outside, curious about what was happening. That's when a woman no one recognized showed up, just as interested as the rest of the crowd. Apparently, she was there for the same errand Gwangdu had talked about, but she was pretty annoyed that she had to get involved herself. Meanwhile, inside the building, Heng had just arrived on the scene. She was both shocked and scared by the chaos going on, knowing she'd probably end up getting blamed for it all later. The first thing she saw was Seolhwa and Gwangdu standing face to face, both looking like they were ready to tear each other apart. Out of nowhere, the deputy suddenly appeared and started apologizing to Hang Kyang, though she had no clue why he was asking for forgiveness or why Seolhwa seemed ready to fight the bald guy. The deputy didn't even get a chance to explain because Gwangdu started yelling at Seolhwa, accusing her of taking away everything that mattered to him. Seolhwa, on the other hand, didn't even recognize Gwangdu and had no idea what he was talking about. Hyeol was just as confused as everyone else about what Seolhwa had supposedly done to Gwangdu, but he wasn't about to just stand there and watch. He stepped forward, pushed Seolhwa behind him, and, acting like a real stand-up guy, declared he'd take full responsibility for whatever Seolhwa had done, even though he didn't have the slightest idea what it was. Just a few seconds earlier, he'd been running around like a cartoon character, but now his sudden burst of bravery not only caught the bald guy off guard, it also seriously impressed Seolhwa, who never saw it coming. Trying to act all tough, Hyeol started shouting about the past, how the first time he ever picked up a sword, it was because he wanted to protect someone he cared about. Now, since he and Seol had promised to get married, he said they had to share everything, whether it was happiness or responsibility. Seolhwa could hardly believe what she was seeing. Watching Hyeol stand up for her and risk everything was honestly shocking. Hyeol kept going, saying he was sure this whole mess was just a big misunderstanding, and he didn't believe for a second that Seolhwa would hurt anyone without a real reason. Even though Seolhwa was too stunned to say anything and just listened to him trying to defend her, Hyeol suddenly announced that if anyone had to pay for what Seol supposedly took from Gwangdu, it should be him. Gwangdu, the bald guy, looked a little thrown off by how serious Hyeol was about taking the blame for Seolhwa. Right at that moment, Hang tried to jump in and remind Gwangdu that he was supposed to be talking to them about getting some important item, but Gwangdu wasn't interested. It was clear he wanted to deal with this grudge first. He stepped forward and pressed the edge of his sword right against Hyeol's throat, looking like he was ready to settle things once and for all. Even though Hyeol was clearly shaking, Seolhwa tried to get him to stop pretending to be so brave for her sake. But he wouldn't back down. That's when Gwangdu leaned in and started whispering those ominous words people usually say right before an execution. Seolhwa was terrified. She knew she couldn't do anything to interfere. Gwangdu looked dead serious, like he was really about to take Hyeol's head off. But the truth was, he wasn't nearly as ruthless as he seemed. It wasn't clear if Gwangdu changed his mind at the last minute or if this was his plan all along. But instead of actually hurting Hyeol, he suddenly announced he was just going to shave the guy's head as payback for losing his own hair. The moment Hyeol heard this, he was completely baffled. He'd been bracing himself to lose his head, and now it turned out all he was getting was a free haircut, something he hadn't had in years. Everyone else jumped in at that point, obviously annoyed that all the chaos, chasing, and drama was just over a haircut. Before Gwangdu could say anything else, the same woman from before showed up and landed a solid smack right on his head, calling him ridiculous and asking why he was acting like such an idiot. The bald guy dropped to the ground, knocked out cold, while the woman started explaining herself. She said she'd come because the person they'd originally sent to run the errand had ended up in jail before he could even get the job done, so she was forced to come and take care of it herself. She introduced herself as Qin, the elder of the Manhwa sect, and then deeply apologized for all the trouble their disciple had caused. Tang immediately recognized her and was completely shocked. She hadn't realized that Qin, now revealing herself as the Manhwa elder, was the same woman who had once secretly worked as her assistant, disguised behind a fake identity. Now, fate had brought them face to face again. Other than Tang, the woman also recognized Seolhwa and Hyeol right away, both by their looks and their well-known reputations. She acted like this was her first time meeting them in person, even though she clearly knew who they were. Before she could really do anything, Hang suddenly jumped in front of Hyeol and declared that he was her personal bodyguard, so Qin couldn't lay a finger on him. Qin hadn't actually planned to threaten or hurt anyone, but the way Hang rushed to protect Hyeol made her wonder if the rumors she'd heard about him might actually be true. Just mentioning those rumors made Tang tense up, ready for a fight. Everyone knew Hyeol's reputation for wild behavior, and Tang figured maybe this woman had come to take him down. But Qin quickly clarified that all she'd really heard were stories about Hyeol being a bit of a womanizer, supposedly attracting all sorts, from young, flat-chested girls to merchants, beauties, and fighters. It was anyone's guess what she wanted, but then Qin suddenly pulled back her robe a bit, showing off her impressive curves, and announced she wanted to join their so-called harem because it seemed like they were missing someone like her. Trying to make it sound more reasonable, Qin said she was only offering because she felt bad about her disciple causing so much trouble, and this seemed like a fitting apology for the hassle they'd all been put through. Normally, you'd think Hyeol would be thrilled about adding a new and very different kind of woman to his group, but honestly, he didn't feel that way at all. His lack of excitement just made Qin move in even closer, clearly trying to use her assets to grab his attention and promising she could keep up with the younger women. Tang was the first to speak up, telling Qin she should really be ashamed of herself. After all, she was a respected master from the Manhwa sect. She shouldn't be acting like some desperate old lady. That jab definitely struck a nerve, and Qin face showed she was pretty ticked off. Qin snapped back, saying she never got to do any of this kind of stuff when she was young because the elders at Manhwa tricked her into a position she never wanted. Because of that, she missed her chance at marriage and ended up getting older without ever having a shot at romance or even being with a man. When Tang asked how old she really was, Qin grinned and claimed she was only 25. Of course, Tang didn't buy it for a second. Qin looked at least twice that age. Tang decided not to argue about her age anymore, but before anyone could say anything else, Qin made another move on Hyeol, practically begging him to let her join his harem. To sweeten the deal, she pointed out that he already had 3 women, and adding one more with even bigger assets wasn't going to cause him any more trouble. In fact, it might just be the opposite. At that moment, the one person who probably shouldn't have moved decided she'd had enough. Seolhwa, tired of all the nonsense, started walking forward and told Hyeol to step aside. Hyeol didn't even try to argue. He just stood there, watching her walk past him. Sure, the idea of having another talented and gorgeous woman around wasn't the worst thing in the world, but honestly, he couldn't say a word with Seolhwa right there. Seolhwa was in no mood to let anyone else get close to her fiancé. She was ready to do whatever it took to put a stop to it. She was already upset that the time they'd promised to spend together had been ruined by a stupid mistake. And if that wasn't bad enough, because of that mistake, Hyeol's life had been put in danger. And now, to top it all off, this shameless woman had the nerve to make a move on her fiancé right in front of her. Seolhwa's patience had officially run out. As soon as she got close enough, Seolhwa unleashed a wave of lightning straight at Qin, yelling at her to just get lost already. Of course, Qin wasn't just any ordinary woman. She was a martial arts master, and she wasn't about to go down that easily. The next second, the attack hit its mark, and a thunderous shockwave filled the room. The deputy immediately dove behind Tang to take cover. Thankfully, and just as you'd expect, none of the women, especially the beautiful ones, got hurt. Not even a scratch. At that moment, Qin eyes landed on something that made her freeze. She just stood there, staring at the scene in front of her with a mix of jealousy and disbelief. What caught her off guard was Hyeol. He quickly walked over to Seolhwa and gently tried to calm her down, maybe hoping to convince her to be okay with bringing Chi-Young into their group. But the real shock for Chi-Young was seeing how Seolhwa, who just moments ago looked like a total powerhouse, now acted like a little 3-year-old girl in Hyeol's arms. Suddenly, the deputy official rushed over to Chi-Young, practically falling at her feet and begging for forgiveness. The interruption snapped her out of her thoughts about Seolhwa. Chi-Young didn't even know who this guy was, but he started babbling about the box that Hang was supposed to deliver to them. He said he'd hand it over if they just promised not to hurt him. This only left Chi-Young more confused. Without anyone threatening him or even saying a word, the deputy started sobbing and spilled everything. He explained, through his tears, that the chief magistrate had forced him to steal the box, and he didn't have a choice but to follow orders. As soon as he mentioned the chief magistrate's name, everyone's attention snapped to him. They all stopped what they were doing, curiosity written all over their faces, wanting to hear what else he had to say. Meanwhile, outside the building, the very person they'd just been talking about, the chief magistrate, started shouting. He called Hyeol and the girls a bunch of Murim scoundrels who had taken over the government office, and yelled that they were completely surrounded with no way out. Turns out, the whole thing had been a setup, and now they were trapped with no real option except to surrender and face whatever punishment the so-called law had in store for them. After a little while, one of the chief's men came up behind him and let him know that the area around the place was now secure. The old man still wasn't sure if the others were inside, though. He hadn't heard a peep from them since he'd yelled for them to surrender. On top of that, he realized the building was in pretty bad shape and had already taken a lot of damage, so they couldn't just storm in without risking everything. When his subordinate brought up their biggest worry, the demon's sword of chaos, the chief magistrate got annoyed. He reminded everyone that they were supposed to be the emperor's soldiers and shouldn't be scared of someone like that. The old man felt pretty confident, especially since he'd just heard that an elder from Manhwa had stepped in and probably already beaten the demon's sword of chaos to a pulp. He also knew the deputy, Hyeol, was stuck in there with the intruders. But instead of wanting to help him, the chief secretly hoped something bad had happened to Hyeol, so he could use it as leverage against Manhwa and finally get his hands on that special item. When his assistant tried to bring up the rumors about Hyeol, the one who supposedly uses some wicked spell to charm women, the chief just brushed it off. He refused to believe any of that gossip. In his opinion, even if part of that rumor was true, his opponent was the Manhwa elder. She wasn't just any woman who could get charmed that easily. As soon as he finished his speech, the whole building in front of him suddenly collapsed, turning into nothing but rubble right before his eyes. The old man walked over, trying to figure out what could have caused the building to come down like that. That's when he noticed something, or rather, someone standing there. Right on top of the ruins stood the trio, Seolhwa, Hyeol, and Hang Kyang. They were standing tall and completely unharmed, facing the chief, while Chi-Young managed to escape getting crushed under the debris. The sight was hard for the crafty old man to believe. All his plans and ideas seemed to have fallen apart in an instant. As usual, it was Seolhwa who had single-handedly saved Hyeol and Hang, and both of them thanked her for rescuing them. Again, Hang was a bit upset, though, mostly blaming that big melon woman for putting her life at risk by recklessly fighting Seolhwa. In response, she tried to apologize, but it didn't really help calm Hang down. Even though Chi-Young was physically okay, she was covered in dust and dirt, only probably because she had jumped in to protect her disciple, which she managed to pull off. Meanwhile, in the background, the chief was shouting and demanding to know why Chi-Young, the Manhwa elder, hadn't taken care of the demon's sword of chaos, the biggest threat to martial arts. To his surprise, Chi-Young suddenly turned around and announced that Hyeol would soon be her husband, and from now on, no one should even think about laying a finger on him. At that moment, the ugly old man finally realized that the rumors he'd heard, and kept denying, were actually true. He'd really underestimated Hyeol's abilities. To make things even worse for him, Tang showed up on the other side, carrying the deputy. She lifted the deputy's head to show him to the chief, letting him know they'd already learned everything about his twisted plans. Hang, looking totally ticked off, demanded to know how that old geezer dared to abuse her trust. And on top of that, he'd even trained a weird owl to steal her item. The chief magistrate slowly started to realize things were going south fast, and now he was definitely in trouble. He blamed Hyeon Seong for the whole mess he was in. But since he still had his authority, he tried to play it cool and denied everything, shouting back at them and reminding everyone that he was the chief of the county. He insisted they had no right to question him, especially after they destroyed the whole government building and forced the deputy into making a false confession. Then, out of nowhere, he pinned all the blame for the chaos on Hyeol and immediately sentenced him to a painful death. The poor guy was left speechless, wondering why he was always the one getting blamed and punished for everything. The chief had no clue how powerless Hyeol actually was, but that didn't matter to him. He decided to use the situation to his advantage, trying to stir up conflict among them by demanding they hand over the demon's sword to him. And if they did, he promised to let the rest of them go without any punishment. That didn't help his case at all. In fact, it just pushed Seol to step in and try to shut him up herself, only to be held back by Hyeol, at least for the moment. Instead of Seol, Chi In-young decided to handle the sneaky old man herself. She walked up to him and kind of gave him a glimpse of her stunning beauty, the sort of thing every old man secretly wishes he could have. The chief magistrate was no exception. He was clearly impressed, especially by her curves. But at the same time, he was nervous. He knew she was no ordinary woman. Even so, he wouldn't let her get a word in. He started ranting, blaming her for failing to catch the demon sword of chaos and accusing her of having a hand in the destruction of the government building. Hearing all this nonsense, Chi In-young decided to change her approach and just let the old man finish his ridiculous speech. But since he just kept running his mouth with no shame, she'd finally had enough and decided to put an end to it, using a little bit of force. With just her fingers, Chi In-young silenced him effortlessly. She told him straight up that she'd be reporting everything he'd done. That included not just his greed from Manhwa's property, but also falsely accusing their disciple, locking him up, and pretending to be a loyal servant of the emperor. To drive her point home, she made it clear that all of this was nothing short of declaring war against the Murim. When she warned him about the consequences of his actions, the old geezer, who now looked totally terrified, finally apologized and decided it was best to just let things go and move on quietly. After that long and chaotic night, things finally wrapped up in a surprisingly smooth way by morning. As the sun came up, Chi In-young opened the box in front of the group, showing them what was inside for the first time, just to make sure it was really what they'd been after. Hyeol, like everyone else, was super curious about what this little item could be that made him so important. Tang, on the other hand, looked kind of let down, thinking that all the trouble they'd gone through probably wasn't worth it for something so small. Chi In-young herself didn't really know why the sect leader had sent her personally to pick it up. Unlike the others, though, it wasn't her first time seeing this thing. In fact, she caught a glimpse of it 30 years ago. She seemed to know a little more about it, but when Tang asked what it actually was, Chi In-young just dodged the question. Before anyone else could start bombarding her with more questions, Chi In-young turned to Hang and thanked her for delivering the item safe and sound. Then, without missing a beat, she suddenly grabbed Hyeol's hands right in front of Seol, flashed him a look, and asked if they could meet again. This time, just the two of them. That's when someone else piped up, cutting in and reminding Chi In-young that she might want to show a bit more dignity. It was her disciple, who was tied up tightly in a bag, speaking up to his master and telling her she should be ashamed of treating that boy, who's practically like her own son, like a love interest, especially since he already has 3 women to look after. But Chi In-young wasn't the type to get embarrassed or to hide her real feelings, so she just brushed it off. After giving his advice to Hyeol's new sugar mommy, Gwangdu turned to Seol and Hyeol, reminding them that he still hadn't forgotten about losing his precious hair. Honestly, everyone had heard enough about that grudge already, and just the mention of it made them all roll their eyes. Still, Gwangdu kept going, promising that he'd be back at the right time and place to settle the score with both of them once and for all, in a fair fight, just like a legendary showdown between a phoenix and a dragon. The bald guy told them not to forget what he said and to look forward to the day it happens. Of course, neither Seolhwa nor Hyeol really wanted to pay him any attention, but the funny thing was Seolhwa still couldn't remember who this bald guy even was or what grudge he was talking about in the first place. Before she could figure it out, Chi In-young casually picked the boy up, bag and all, and started carrying him off toward Manhwa sect, waving goodbye and saying she hoped to see everyone again soon. With that, their mission to deliver the item finally came to a peaceful end, even though it had been way more trouble than expected, mostly thanks to Tang. Tired and worn out, they started heading back to town, hoping to find a carriage for the trip home and maybe get some rest along the way. On their walk, Hyeol and Hyeol held hands like they always did, but it only took a few seconds for Hyeol to notice something was different about Seolhwa. He thought maybe she was just tired, but that wasn't really it. Her mind kept drifting back to the previous night when they hadn't gotten a chance to recharge, and her plans for a romantic evening had been ruined by Hang and the others. Still, Seol didn't say anything about it, and Hyeol didn't press her for details. Not long after, they made it to town, and the first thing they did was arrange for a carriage to take them home. Just like at the hotel, Hang stepped up first and told the clerk they needed a 4-seater carriage to get back to their hometown. But this time, before the clerk could respond, Hyeol slammed his hand on the desk and insisted they get 2 carriages, one for each couple. He even told the guy to hurry up, and if they didn't have enough carriages, to build at least one right away. Hyeol was obviously doing this to win Seolhwa's heart again, and it totally worked. Seolhwa looked genuinely touched, realizing that Hyeol actually wanted some alone time with her, and that it wasn't just her wish. Meanwhile, not too far away, Tang watched the whole thing and could barely stand to see it. She figured they might actually break the rented carriages before they even made it home.